Come, find your most comfortable position, feeling the support beneath you. The story that is waiting for you tonight is a soft and gentle one, a story about a place and a people wrapped in shadows and whispers. It's a story of a fortress built on a mountain peak, and an idea that was, in its own way, even more difficult to conquer. As you begin to settle, just one gentle thought. If this space feels like a comfort to you, you might consider a soft tap on the like or subscribe button. But only if that thought feels as effortless as a quiet breath. I always find it so peaceful to know where you're listening from. If you feel like it, you can leave your city and the time in the comments below. It creates a quiet map of us all, finding rest together. Your presence here is what matters most. And so find that gentle darkness in your room, perhaps with a soft blanket pulled a little closer as we begin our slow drift into tonight's tale. The day is hot, and the air in this small Persian town is thick with the smell of baked clay, spices from the market, and the faint, dusty scent of goats. You are sitting in the shade of a fig tree, your fingers methodically weaving threads on a small worn loom. The pattern is simple, one you could do in your sleep. It has to be simple. Anything too intricate, too beautiful, might draw the wrong kind of attention. Here, under the gaze of the Seljuk governors, it is best to be unremarkable. Your entire community has learned the art of being forgettable. You are Nizari Ismailis. For you, this is the true path of your faith, a branch of Shia Islam that sees the world differently than the Sunni Seljuk lords who rule this land. Your prayers are quieter, your gatherings are secret, and your leaders are far away, spoken of in hushed and hopeful tones. To the Seljuks, you are a heretic, a dangerous dissident. To your people, you are simply a believer, waiting for a sign. A non sits down near you, not too close, but within the shade of the same tree. He looks like any other traveling merchant, his face weathered by the sun, his robes dusty from the road. He begins to mend a strap on his leather satchel, his movements slow and deliberate. You've seen him in the market for a few days, selling cheap pottery that Julie's selling. He is watching, always watching. He doesn't look at you, but he speaks, his voice slow and calm, barely a whisper above the distant bleating of a lamb. They say a clever weaver can hide a message in the threads of a carpet, he says. A message only another weaver can see. Your fingers freeze on the loom for just a second. It is a phrase you were told to listen for, a key to a lock you didn't even know you were carrying. Your father before he passed and taught you the words. But a truly clever weaver, you reply, your own voice steady, though your heart has begun to beat a little faster, knows that the most important messages are carried not in the carpet, but by the one who lays it down. The man nods, a faint, almost imperceptible smile on his lips. He continues his work for a moment, then gets up to leave. As he passes, he drops a small, smooth white stone at your feet. It's a simple river stone, unremarkable to anyone else, but you know what it is, a summons. Later that night, long after the moon has risen, you sit with your mother. You've shown her the stone. She holds it in her palm, her face illuminated by a single flickering oil lamp. There are tears in her eyes, but also a fierce pride. This is the moment every Nizari family quietly prepares for, and quietly prepares for, and quietly fears. The call to Alamut. Alamut. The name itself is a legend, the eagle's nest. A fortress so high in the mountains, so unconquerable, that it has become a symbol of your people's defiance. It is the home of the old man of the mountain, your leader, Hassan-i Sabbah. Ayman the Seljuks call a devil, and your people call a visionary. Historians, centuries from now, will argue about the motivations of young people like you. Were you driven by pure religious fervor, a belief in the promise of a just world? Was it a desire for escape from a life of persecution and poverty? Or was it something else, a deeper yearning for purpose, to be a part of something grand and meaningful? As you look at your mother's face, you realize it's all of those things, and none of them. It is simply the path. The summons doesn't come with a map. It comes with a simple instruction, whispered by the merchant potter, the day the missionary before he vanished back into the winding roads. Follow the river north into the mountains. Leave the water when you see a peak that looks like a sitting eagle. From there, you will be guided. It's an absurdly vague instruction. The Elbrus Mountains are vast, a jagged wall of rock and snow. There could be a dozen peaks that look like a sitting eagle. This is the first test, you realize. A test of faith, of patience, of interpretation. This isn't just a physical journey, it's a pilgrimage of the mind. The Days who recruit for Alamut are known to be masters of philosophy and debate, seeking not just the strong, but the sharp-witted. They don't want blind followers. They want intelligent, devoted instruments. You pack nothing but a water skin, a loaf of bread, and a warm cloak. You hug your mother one last time in the silent courtyard of your small home. There are no grand goodbyes. You simply slip out of the sleeping town like a ghost, a shadow detaching itself from other shadows, and turn your face to the north. The river is a silver ribbon under the moonlight, and you begin to walk, leaving behind the only life you have ever known for a promise, a whisper, a single white stone. The journey is, to put it mildly, a brutal form of filtration. The lowlands with their dusty hills and sparse olive groves soon give way to a landscape that feels actively hostile. The path, which was never really a path to begin with, disappears entirely. You are now scrambling over loose rock, the kind that seems solid until you put your full weight on it, at which point it cheerfully skitters away, sending a shower of pebbles into the canyon below. Days are spent with the sun beating down on you, forcing you to find shade under scraggly, thorny bushes that seem to resent your presence. Nights are a different kind of challenge. The mountain air is thin and cold, a startling contrast to the heat of the day, and the silence is so profound it feels loud. It's a silence broken only by the wind whistling through unseen crevices and, occasionally, the distant howl of a wolf. You start to understand why the Seljuk armies have never tried to take Alamut by force. The mountains themselves are the first line of defense. An army would starve or freeze to death long before it ever reached the castle walls. You follow the river as instructed, a roaring, churning thing that carves a deep scar through the landscape. It is your only companion. Its constant noise is a comfort, but its power is a constant reminder of your own fragility. One misstep, one moment of lost balance, and you would be swept away, your grand mission ending as an anonymous casualty of geography. You see no one. For days, you are utterly alone. The solitude works on you, stripping away the person you were in the town. The weaver, the son, the quiet heretic, all of that peels away, layer by layer, until all that's left is a core of pure determination. This is another part of the test, you realize. To be truly devoted, you must be able to stand alone, to find strength not in a crowd, but within yourself. Then, after what feels like an eternity, you see it. You round a bend in the river, your eyes scanning the horizon as they have 1,000 times before, and there it is, a single dominant peak, its silhouette against the pale morning sky unmistakable. It looks exactly like a massive eagle, wings slightly folded, head held high, surveying its domain. The description wasn't vague at all. It was perfectly, impossibly precise. When you know what you are looking for, it is the only thing you can see. Leaving the river feels like abandoning your only friend. You fill your water skin one last time, look up at the peak, and begin the final ascent. This part of the journey is vertical. You are climbing now, using your hands as much as your feet, pulling yourself up rock faces, finding precarious handholds and footholds. Your muscles burn, your lungs ache for air that isn't there, and your mind narrows to a single, repetitive thought. Up. It's on one of these vertical faces while you're clinging to the rock like a lizard that you hear a voice. You are a long way from home, Weaver. The voice comes from above. You tilt your head back, your neck cracking in protest. A man is standing on a ledge no wider than your foot, looking down at you. He is dressed in simple, earth-toned clothing, blending in perfectly with the rock around him. He is holding a coil of rope. He hadn't been there a moment ago. Or if he had, he was as invisible as the mountain wind. You don't ask how he knows who you are. At this point, you assume they know everything. The journey is the home, you reply, repeating a phrase you once heard a day say. The man allows a small smile. He lowers the rope. The last part is easier with a friend. He is your guide, one of the sentinels of Alamut. He leads you through a series of hidden trails and goat paths that are completely invisible from below. He moves with a quiet, efficient grace, a testament to a life spent in this terrain. Along the way, you see the fortress's defenses, not just walls and towers, but a brilliantly integrated system of natural and man-made obstacles. There are rock slides waiting to be triggered, narrow passes that could be held by a handful of men against an army, and cisterns for collecting water that are cut deep into the rock, making the fortress immune to a siege of thirst. This is a place built by engineers and strategists, not just stonemasons. One of the most fascinating and little-known facts about Alamut is its sophisticated water system. The fortress had a series of canals and underground reservoirs, a marvel of hydro, a constant supply of fresh water. This wasn't just for drinking, it fed the gardens, and kept the community self-sufficient. This focus on practical knowledge, on science and engineering, is something the Seljuk propaganda conveniently leaves out. They prefer the image of a nest of fanatics, not a mountaintop university of survival. As you get closer, the fortress itself comes into view. It's not one single structure, but a complex of buildings clinging to the very spine of the mountain ridge. The walls seem to grow organically from the rock, the same texture. From a distance, you wouldn't even see it. It is a masterpiece of camouflage and defiance. The name Alamut, your guide tells you, is thought to mean eagle's teaching or eagle's nest. The historical accuracy of this translation is, of course, debated by linguists and historians. Some suggest it has older, pre-Islamic roots, its true meaning lost to time. To you, in this moment, eagle's nest feels exactly right. Finally, you pass through a gate that is less a gate and more a cleverly fortified crack in the rock. And you are inside. The air is different here. It's still thin and cool, but it's humming with a quiet energy. You see men training with swords in a courtyard, their movements fluid and precise. You see others poring over scrolls in a sunlit alcove. You see women tending to vegetable gardens terraced into the mountainside. It's not a military camp. It's a thriving, self-contained world. A small city perched between the earth and the sky. You have arrived. You have passed the tests of the road, the mountain, and the solitude. You have climbed to the eagle's nest. And now you wait. Because here, in this impossible place, your real education is about to begin. You're given a small, Spartan room carved out of the mountain itself. The walls are cool, smooth rock, and a narrow opening looks out over a truly terrifying drop. And beyond it, a panorama of jagged peaks. Food is brought to you, simple but nourishing fare of bread, cheese, dates, and water. It's a time for decompression, for your body to acclimate to the altitude and your mind to acclimate to the reality of where you are. You spend the time watching the life of the fortress from your window. You see the routines, the quiet purpose in every honest movements. There's no shouting, no wasted energy. It's a community, running with the efficiency of a finely crafted watch. This isn't the den of madmen the Seljuk preachers described in their mosques. It's a place of discipline and order. On the morning of the third day, the guide who found you on the mountain appears at your door. He says nothing, simply beckons for you to follow. He leads you not to a throne room or a grand hall, but to a small, secluded garden. It's one of the many terraces carved into the rock, sheltered from the wind. A few simple benches are scattered among pomegranate and apricot trees. Sitting on one of these benches, reading a scroll, is an old man. He is thin, almost frail, with a neatly trimmed white beard and eyes that seem to hold the quiet intensity of a scholar. He's dressed in simple, undyed wool robes, no different from many of the other men you've seen in the fortress. There is no crown, no silk, no trappings of power. If you had passed him in a courtyard, you might have assumed he was one of the librarians or teachers. But when he looks up at you, the air changes. His gaze is not intimidating, but it is deeply, profoundly penetrating. It feels as though he is not just looking at you, but reading you, taking in your entire history, your fears, your hopes in a single, silent moment. This is Hassan-i Sabbah, the old man of the mountain, the Grand Master, the weaver's son from Kazvin, he says. His voice is calm, not loud, but it carries a natural authority. Your loom is quiet now. Do you miss it? You are struck speechless. Of course he knows where you are from, but the mention of the loom, your craft, is disarming. It's a small personal detail that cuts through the myth and the legend. I am here to learn a new craft, my lord, you managed to say. Hassan smiles faintly. Craft is craft. The principles are the same. Patience, attention to detail, understanding the material you work with, whether it is thread or people. He gestures to the bench opposite him. Sit. Tell me what you saw on your journey here. You sit, your mind racing. What does he want to hear? About the hardship, your determination. You decide on the simple truth. You talk about the loneliness, the beauty of the landscape, the cleverness of the defenses. You talk about the feeling of leaving the world behind and climbing towards the sky. He listens patiently, his head tilted slightly, his eyes never leaving yours. When you are done, he nods slowly. Good. You have eyes that see. Many people look, but they do not see. They see a mountain. You saw a fortress. They see a river. You saw a guide. This is the first and most important lesson. This is the beginning of your real interview. For the next hour, he asks you questions. Not about your loyalty or your bravery, but about philosophy, about logic. He poses paradoxes to you. If a corrupt ruler builds a hospital that saves 1,000 lives, is he a good man? If a just law causes one innocent person to suffer, is it a just law? You realize you are being tested again, but this is a test of the mind, of your ability to think, to reason, to see the world not in simple blacks and whites, but in shades of grey. Historians will forever debate the true nature of Hassan-i Sabbah. Was he a religious messiah, a political revolutionary, or a pragmatic strategist? The truth, as you are beginning to understand it, is that he was all three. He was a scholar who became a warlord, a mystic who became a master of espionage. One of the more obscure aspects of his history is his early life. He was born in Qom, a center of sheer scholarship, and received a top-tier education. He was a brilliant student of theology, but also of science, mathematics, and astronomy. In his youth, he traveled extensively, from Egypt to the far corners of Persia, absorbing knowledge. He wasn't some mountain bandit who stumbled into power. He was an intellectual who chose the mountains as his sanctuary and his weapon. He saw that the vast Seljuk Empire was like a giant, powerful but slow and clumsy. A flea, he knew, could not fight an elephant head-on. But a flea could bite, could carry a disease, could drop the elephant to madness. This was the core of his strategy. Precision over power, intelligence over brute force. The Seljuks have armies, Hassan says, as if reading your thoughts. They have territory. They have gold. We have none of these things. What we have, he taps his temple gently, is this: the belief in a just cause and the intelligence to see it through. They believe power comes from the sword. We will teach them that true power comes from the mind that guides the dagger that is held by the hand of a man who believes. His words are hypnotic, not because they are loud or passionate, but because they are clear, logical, and imbued with an unshakable confidence. You came here expecting a fierce commander, a holy warrior. You found a teacher, a philosopher king. He is dismantling your expectations one by one and rebuilding your understanding of the world. Finally, he stands up. The interview is over. You have a good mind, Weaver's son. But it is an unterprim blade. We will give it an edge here. Go to the library. Your training will begin there. Read. Learn. Understand the world you wish to change. The dagger is the last thing you will learn to hold, not the first. He turns and walks back towards the inner fortress, leaving you alone in the garden. You look at the scroll he left on the bench. It's a text on Euclidean geometry. You stare at it, then up at the fortress walls, at the vast, uncaring sky. You came here to become a weapon. And your first lesson is in mathematics. The old man of the mountain is not at all what you expected. He is something far more dangerous and far more brilliant. The guide from the mountain leads you away from the garden through a series of stone corridors that seem to twist deep into the heart of the peak. The air grows cooler, and the scent of old paper and ink fills your senses. He stops before a heavy wooden door and pushes it open, revealing a room that takes your breath away. It is the library. It is not a single room, but a series of interconnected chambers, their walls lined from floor to ceiling with shelves. and the shelves are overflowing with scrolls and bound codices. Sunlight streams in from cleverly placed light wells cut through the rock above, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Scholars, both young and old, sit at long wooden tables, engrossed in their work, their quiet scratching of reed pens on parchment the only sound. This is the intellectual heart of Alamut, and you can feel it. This is the fortress's true treasure, more valuable than any gold. The Seljuks could burn 100 Nizari villages, but they could not touch this. This was the engine of their rebellion. Your guide introduces you to an elderly man with ink-stained fingers and a kind, wary face. This is the chief librarian, and for the next several months, he will be your master. You are not given a sword, a dagger, or a bow. You are given a stack of texts and a quiet corner to work in. Your education begins. And it is overwhelmingly vast. You study theology, of course, the intricate details of Ismaili doctrine, the arguments that separate your faith from others. But that is only the beginning. You are taught history, not just the history of Islam, but of the Romans, the Persians, the Greeks. You learn about their triumphs and, more importantly, their mistakes. You study geography, poring over maps that are shockingly detailed, charting the trade routes, the political boundaries, the weaknesses and strengths of every major city from Samarkand to Cairo. You learn about their water sources, their market days, their local dialects. You study mathematics and astronomy, learning to navigate by the stars. You learn about engineering and chemistry, understanding how structures are built and how certain substances react with one another. Hassan-i Sabbah believed that to change the world, you first had to understand it in its entirety. It is during one of these study sessions that the Grand Master's core doctrine is explained to you, not by Hassan himself, but by one of his most trusted days, a man named Buzurg Amid who would one day succeed him. He finds you struggling with a text by the philosopher Al-Farabi. He sits with you, patiently explaining a difficult passage, and then he begins to talk. You have seen the Seljuk army, he says. A river of steel and horses. 1,000 of our best men would be a drop of rain against that river. To fight them on their terms is to choose annihilation. It is vanity. It is foolishness. He gestures to the library around you. The Grand Master, may his wisdom guide us, understood this. He did not seek to match their strength. He sought to find their weakness. And here, he lays out the philosophy that will terrify the rulers of the Middle East for the next 2 centuries. It is the doctrine of asymmetrical warfare, articulated with chilling clarity. An army is a body, the day explains. It has arms and legs, muscles and bone, but it also has a head, a general, a vizier, a sultan. And the body, no matter how powerful, is useless without the head. If you cut off the head, the body collapses. It thrashes for a while, but it is dead. Why fight the entire body when you can simply remove the head? This is the core of it. The Nizaris would not wage war on armies. They would wage war on specific, powerful individuals whose removal would cause the maximum amount of chaos and instability for their enemies. Not random terror, but targeted, political assassination as a form of strategic warfare. One man, the day continues, his voice a low whisper, or woman who is patient, who is intelligent, who can blend in, who can get close, that one person is more valuable than 1,000 soldiers. They are a weapon that can walk through a city's gates, eat in its taverns, pray in its mosques, and be welcomed into the very chambers of the man they have been sent to strike. Historians today still analyze this strategy. Many consider Hassan-i Sabbah a pioneer of psychological warfare. His goal wasn't just to eliminate enemies, but to create an aura of terrifying omnipresence. No ruler, no matter how well guarded, could feel truly safe. The fear of the unseen Nizari agent, the fighter eye, was often more potent than the act itself. This constant, low-level dread could paralyze a government, sow discord among its leaders, and make them hesitant to act against the Nizari community. But there is a part of this doctrine that is often overlooked, a strange and fascinating detail. The assassinations were almost always carried out in public, in a crowded mosque during Friday prayers, in a busy marketplace, in the middle of a royal court. This was not for lack of opportunity to strike in secret. It was a deliberate choice. The strike must be a message, the day tells you. It must be seen. When the vizier falls, everyone must know who sent the blade. It is not murder. It is a proclamation. It is a sermon delivered in blood. It says, we are here. We are watching. You are not untouchable. A secret death is just a rumor. A public death is a statement. This is a chilling piece of stagecraft. The fighter I often made no attempt to escape. Their own death was part of the mission, a testament to their devotion. They were not just killers, they were martyrs for their cause. You look down at the philosophy text in your hands, and then at the shelves full of knowledge around you. It all starts to click into place. The geography tells you where the target is. The history tells you why he is a target. The languages and cultural studies tell you how to get close to him. The mathematics and science give you the discipline of mind to plan the operation. And the theology gives you to see it through, no matter the cost. The library is not a place of peaceful learning. It is an armory. Every scroll, every map, every equation is a weapon. You are not just being educated. You are being forged, and the Grand Master's doctrine is the fire. After months spent in the cool, dusty confines of the library, your mind buzzing with political data, you are finally led out into the sunlight. But you are not taken to the training yards. Instead, your guide leads you up a narrow, winding staircase carved into the rock, towards a section of the fortress you have not yet seen. He opens a simple wooden door, and you step through, and you walk into paradise, or at least a very convincing imitation of it. Before you lies a lush, manicured garden, a riot of impossible green clinging to the side of the barren mountain. Fountains, fed by those ingenious hidden cisterns, splash into marble basins. The air is heavy with the scent of roses, jasmine, and honeysuckle. Birds you haven't seen since the lowlands sing in cages of woven willow. Streams of milk and honey, or at least something that looks remarkably like them, flow in small, curved channels alongside the pathways. Beautiful pavilions draped in colorful silks are dotted throughout the garden, and inside them, young men and women, dressed in fine clothes, recline on cushions. They are listening to musicians play lutes and flutes, drinking wine from silver goblets, and eating exotic fruits from golden platters. The whole scene is one of peaceful, decadent bliss. It is utterly surreal, a vibrant dream stitched into the grey reality of the mountain fortress. Your guide watches you, a knowing look in his eyes. The Grand Master believes the mind must be trained, but the spirit must also be shown what it is fighting for. He says cryptically, a glimpse of the reward for true devotion. You are invited to enter, to sit, to partake. You are given a cup of sweet, red wine. It's intoxicating, and the music is hypnotic. For a few hours you are allowed to exist in this pocket of serenity, a stark contrast to the Spartan, disciplined life you've led since your arrival. This is the place that will fuel one of the most enduring unsensational myths about the Nizaris. Centuries later, the Venetian traveler Marco Polo, who never actually visited Alamut, will pass through the region long after the fortress has been destroyed. He will hear stories, third and fourth hand accounts from enemies of the Nizaris, and he will write them down. He will claim that the old man of the mountain used this garden as a tool of indoctrination. He wrote that young recruits would be drugged with a powerful opiate, likely hashish, and brought unconscious into this secret garden. They would wake up in what they were told was the literal, physical paradise promised in the Quran. After a few days of sensual indulgence, they would be drugged again and return to the main fortress. The Grand Master would then tell them that he, and only he, held the power to grant them permanent entry to this paradise, but the price of admission was their absolute, unquestioning obedience, even unto death. It's a fantastic story. It's dramatic, exotic, and explains the fighter, his supposed lack of fear of death. It is also, almost certainly, complete fiction. As you sit there sipping your wine, you see the truth is far more subtle and, in many ways, more impressive. There is no drug, other than the surprisingly potent wine and the intoxicating atmosphere. You are fully conscious, and you know perfectly well that you are still in Alamut. The hour is, the beautiful maidens of paradise are the sons and daughters of other Nizari faithful playing a part. The streams of milk and honey are just that milk from the fortress's goats and honey from its beehives, flowing through clever channels. It is not a literal deception, it is a piece of psychological theater. It's a metaphor made real. Hassan-i Sabbah isn't trying to trick you into thinking you've been to heaven. He's showing you a tangible representation of the peace, beauty, and harmony his movement is striving to create on earth. This is the world the Nizaris want to build, a world free from the brutal, pragmatic ugliness of Seljuk rule. It's a propaganda tool, yes, but for inspiration, not for brainwashing. The debate among historians about these gardens is a fascinating one. Most modern scholars dismiss Marco Polo's account as enemy propaganda, a smear campaign designed to dehumanize the Nizaris and paint them as drug-crazed fanatics rather than a sophisticated political and religious movement. The logistics of drugging people, carrying them around, and maintaining such a massive, secret deception are simply implausible. However, the legend was incredibly powerful. It was so powerful that the very name given to the Nizaris by their enemies, assassin, is believed by some to derive from the word hashishin or hashishitas. This etymology is itself highly controversial. Some scholars argue the name has different roots, perhaps from Asasiyun, meaning those who are faithful to the foundation of the faith. It was easier to fear a man high on drugs than to fear a man who was willing to die for a political ideal. As the sun begins to set, casting long shadows across the garden, the music stops. The spell is broken. You are led back out of the garden, the simple wooden door closing behind you with a soft thud. You are back in the cold, stone reality of the fortress. The transition is jarring. The experience leaves you feeling disoriented, but also strangely motivated. You have not been brainwashed. You have been inspired. You've been shown a vision, a beautiful, fragile thing thriving in the harshest of environments. It's a reminder that beauty is something that must be protected, that must be fought for. The garden wasn't a promise of a reward in the next life. It was a reason to be willing to sacrifice your own life in this one. It's a far more powerful and subtle motivation than any drug-induced hallucination, and far more difficult for outsiders to understand. The idyllic interlude in the garden is over. Your brief glimpse of paradise is filed away, a vibrant memory that now serves as a quiet, internal touchstone. You are returned to the library, but your curriculum has shifted. The foundational knowledge is in place. Now, you must learn how to apply it. The focus moves from the theoretical to the practical, from understanding the world to learning how to operate within it, unseen. You thought your training began when you first opened a scroll on Euclidean geometry, but you were wrong. That was merely the sharpening of the stone. Now, the forging of the blade begins in earnest. You are assigned a new tutor, a man who introduces himself only as Jawad. He is of indeterminate age, with a face that is utterly forgettable. There are no scars, no distinguishing marks, nothing your memory can easily latch onto. His eyes are intelligent, but they reveal nothing. He is a human slate, wiped clean of all personality. And he is, you will soon learn, a master of his craft. Jawad is one of the fortress's most experienced field agents, a fighter who has completed multiple missions and returned a rarity in itself. He is now responsible for training the next generation. His classroom is not the library, but a series of small, specially constructed rooms deep within the fortress. These rooms are designed to mimic the outside world. One is set up as a corner of a bustling bazaar, complete with market stalls and goods. Another is a replica of a caravanserai, a roadside inn where travelers rest. A third is a mock-up of a royal court, with the simple wooden platform serving as a throne. Here, you learn the art of espionage, not as a collection of techniques, but as a form of deep, immersive acting. Jawad teaches you how to walk, how to talk, how to be a dozen different people. You learn the swagger of a Seljuk soldier, the stoop of a devout scholar, the harried movements of a merchant, the aimless shuffle of a beggar. Each role comes with a complete backstory, a new name, a new history, a new way of seeing the world. Anyone can put on a costume, Jawad tells you, his voice a dry rasp. A child can play dress-up. The goal is not to wear the disguise, but to become the person. You must know what your character ate for breakfast, the name of the dog he had as a child, the nagging ache in his left knee. You must inhabit him so completely that you forget, for a time, who you truly are. The training is meticulous. You spend days learning to haggle over the price of saffron, not because you will ever be a real spice merchant, but because you must understand the rhythms and language of the marketplace. You learn the proper way to greet a city guard, the precise level of deference to show, the subtle signs of bribery and corruption. You learn to read faces, to spot a liar, to sense danger before it materializes. One of the most surprising and little-known areas of your training is in memory. The Nizaris could not risk carrying written orders or intelligence. A captured note could compromise an entire network. Therefore, everything had to be memorized. You are trained using sophisticated mnemonic techniques, learning to build memory palaces in your mind, associating pieces of information with specific locations or objects within a familiar mental landscape. You learn to memorize entire poems, not for their beauty, but to embed secret messages within their verses, a code hidden in plain sight. You also learn the more physical aspects of the craft. Not sword fighting. A fighter who gets into a sword fight has already failed, but the arts of stealth and silence. You practice moving without making a sound, using shadows and crowds to become invisible. You learn how to scale walls, how to open locks, how to hide in plain sight. The prevailing historical view, fueled by movies and video games, is of the Nizari Hassan-i Sabbah, our expert in white robes, a highly visible angel of death. The reality you are learning is the exact opposite. The ideal fighter is forgettable. He is the man you bump into in a crowd and apologize to without ever seeing his face. He is the servant pouring wine at a banquet, so far beneath the notice of the powerful men in the room that he might as well be a piece of furniture. The goal is not to be a spectre, but to be ignored. One day, Jawad hands you a small, simple dagger. It is your first. It's well balanced, but unadorned. It is a tool, not a treasure. Your training with the blade is brutally efficient. You do not learn complex forms or dueling techniques. You learn three things: how to conceal the blade, how to draw it quickly and silently, and where to strike for a swift, certain result. The blow is meant to be delivered up close, a sudden, intimate act of violence in a public space. The dagger is not a weapon of war, Jawad says as he guides your hand. It is a key. It opens a door. And you must be standing right in front of the lock to use it. Historians still debate the extent and formalization of this training. Was there a standardized curriculum for all fighter, or were skills taught on a more ad hoc basis, tailored to the individual in the mission? The secretive nature of the Nizar means that first-hand accounts are virtually non-existent. Our understanding is pieced together from the reports of their enemies, the physical evidence of their fortresses, and the few Nizari texts that survived the Mongol invasion. It's likely the truth lies somewhere in the middle, or set of principles taught at fortresses like Alamut, supplemented by personalized training from veteran agents. After weeks of this intense practical education, you feel like a different person. The Weaver's Son is a distant memory, a character you could now play if you had to. You have been emptied out and refilled with new skills, new knowledge, a new identity. You are no longer just a believer. You are an instrument, honed and ready. You have been through the library, the garden, and the classroom. You have been educated, inspired, and trained. The next step is to declare yourself. The day comes without ceremony. Jawad finds you in the training rooms and simply says, "The Grand Master will see you." There is a finality in his tone. This is not another lesson. You are led back to the small private garden where you first meet Hassan-i Sabbah. He is there, just as before, sitting on a stone bench. This time he is not reading. He is simply watching the wind move through the leaves of a pomegranate tree. He gestures for you to sit. For a long time he says nothing. The silence stretches, but it isn't uncomfortable. It feels purposeful, a space for you to gather your thoughts, to truly consider the moment you have arrived at. You think of your journey here, the climb up the mountain, the endless hours in the library, the mind-bending training with Jawad. It has all led to this bench, in this garden, in this silence. Finally, Hassan speaks, his voice as calm as the still mountain air. You have read our books. You have read our methods. You have seen our vision of a just world, but knowledge is not commitment. Skill is not devotion. I have asked nothing of you so far, Weaver's son, now I will. He looks at you, his gaze steady and clear. We are at war. It is a war of ideas fought in the shadows, in the courts, and in the minds of men. To fight this war, we need more than scholars and soldiers. We need those who are willing to become a living embodiment of our will. They Fida-I, a devotee. He lets the word hang in the air. Fida-I. It means one who is willing to sacrifice. You have heard the term whispered in the fortress, always with a mixture of reverence and awe. The Fida is the tip of the spear, the instruments of the Grand Master's doctrine. They are the ones who walk into enemy cities, who live for years under false identities, who deliver the final, public message with a blade. To become a Fida-I, Hassan continues, is to surrender your own life. Not in death necessarily, though that is a likely outcome. It is to surrender your name, your past, your future. You will belong to the cause. Your life will not be your own to command. You will go where you are sent. You will become who you are told to become. You will wait, sometimes for years, for a single moment, a single command. And when that command comes, you will execute it without hesitation, without question, and without fear of the consequences to yourself. It is the highest form of service, and the heaviest of burdens. He pauses, letting the weight of his words settle upon you. This is not a choice to be made lightly. There is no shame in choosing a different path. We need librarians, teachers, engineers, farmers. Every role is honorable. Every contribution is valued. But the path of the Fida-I is for the few. So I ask you now, in the sight of God and your own conscience, are you willing to make this sacrifice? Are you willing to become a devotee? This is the moment of truth. There is no coercion, no threat. Hassan-i Sabbah's method is not to command loyalty, but to inspire it to such a degree that it is freely and totally given. The exact nature of this commitment is a point of significant debate among academics. Did the Fida-I swear a formal verbal oath? Was there a secret initiation ceremony? Or was the commitment a more personal, internal one? Some Ismaili sources describe a profound spiritual bond between the follower and the imam or his representative, in this case, Hassan. For the believer, an order from Hassan would have been an expression of the divine will, making obedience a sacred duty rather than a mere military command. This theological dimension is often lost in Western portrayals, which prefer to frame it as simple, cult-like brainwashing. You look at Hassan-i Sabbah, the scholar revolutionary who built this world on a mountaintop. You think of the persecution your family faced, the casual cruelty of the Seljuk lords. You think of the library, the pursuit of knowledge as a sacred act. You think of the garden, the promise of a better, more beautiful world. And you think of the chilling, undeniable logic of his doctrine. The idea that a single, committed individual can change the course of history. There is no hesitation. You have been preparing for this moment since you first picked up that white stone. My life is not my own, you say, your voice clear and steady. It belongs to the cause. I am yours to command. Hassan nods slowly, a flicker of something, not satisfaction, but perhaps a solemn acknowledgement in his eyes. So be it. From this day forward, you are a Fida-I. The weaver's son is a memory. You are now an instrument of a higher purpose. It feels both like a great weight has been lifted from you and a far heavier one has been placed upon your shoulders. You have shed your personal identity, your individual anxieties and hopes, and in its place is a singular, all-consuming purpose. One of the oddest, most specific details that has come down through history about the Fida is their uniform. On missions, they were masters of disguise. But within the Nizari community, and sometimes it is said, during their final act, they wore a specific color combination. The white tunic with a red sash or belt. White symbolized purity and innocence, while red symbolized the willingness to shed blood their own and their enemies. It was a simple, stark, and powerful piece of branding, turning them into instantly recognizable figures when they chose to be seen. Hassan stands. Your training is complete. Your commitment is made. Now you will learn from the masters who came before you. You will study their missions, their successes, their failures. You must understand the legacy you are inheriting. You have crossed the final threshold. You are no longer a recruit, an apprentice, or a student. You are a devotee, a fide eye. Your personal story is over. From now on, your story will be the story of your missions. And your first lesson will be the tale of the man who started it all, the first great strike that put the fear of Alamut into the heart of an empire. You are not sent out into the world immediately. The final stage of your preparation is to be immersed in the history you are now a part of. You spend your days in a small chamber with other newly sworn fighters, listening to the stories of past missions, told by veteran agents like Jawad. These are not tales of glory, they are case studies, filled with practical lessons about what works and what does not. And every story begins with the first one, the foundational myth. The act that announced the Nizari to the world. The story is of Nizam al-Mulk. Jawad stands before you, his face as impassive as ever, but his voice carries the weight of history. To understand why the world fears us, he begins, you must understand the man we first struck down. He was not just a man. He was an institution. Nizam al-Mulk. The name meant order of the realm. And for over 30 years, he was exactly that. He was the Grand Vizier of the vast Seljuk Empire, the true power behind the throne of two successive sultans, Alparslan and Malik Shah. He was a brilliant administrator, a patron of the arts and sciences, and the architect of the empire's power structure. He created universities, reformed the tax system, and commanded armies. He was, by any measure, one of the most powerful men in the world. He was also Hassan-i Sabbah's greatest enemy. Jawad tells you the backstory, some of which is history, some of which is history, some of which is legend, the two forever intertwined. Hassan and Nizam al-Mulk, along with the famed poet and astronomer Omar Khayyam, were said to have been students together in their youth. They supposedly made a pact that whoever achieved success first would help the other two. Nizam al-Mulk became Grand Vizier, but when Hassan came to him for a position at court, the Vizier, sensing a rival in the brilliant and ambitious Hassan, gave him a minor, powerless role. This betrayal, and historians vigorously debate whether this pact of three ever actually happened, is said to have been the seed of a lifelong animosity. More concretely, Nizam al-Mulk was a devout Sunni Muslim who saw the burgeoning Ismaili movement as a direct threat to the stability of the empire. He wrote extensively against them, denouncing them as heretics. He used the state's power to persecute them, to root them out of cities and towns. For him, the Nizaris were a cancer in the body politic, and he was determined to be the surgeon to remove it. He was our shadow, Jawad says. For every school Hassan built, Nizam al-Mulk founded an Ismaili university to promote Sunni orthodoxy. For every day Hassan sent out to preach, the Vizier sent soldiers to hunt them. He understood us. He knew our power was in our ideas. And so he fought us not just with swords but with ideas of his own. The conflict came to a head when Hassan-i Sabbah captured the fortress of Alamut. For Nizam al-Mulk, this was the final straw. A charismatic heretic with an impregnable fortress in the heart of his empire. It was intolerable. He dispatched a large army to besiege the castle, determined to starve Hassan out and put an end to his rebellion. It was from a besieged Alamut with Seljuk soldiers surrounding the mountain that Hassan made his move. He could not fight their army, so he decided to remove its head. The Grand Master chose the operative himself. Jawad explains, a man named Bedtime. He was not a warrior. He was a teacher, a man of quiet faith, but his devotion was absolute. Hassan-i Sabbah's plan was audacious. He would not strike the Vizier in his heavily guarded palace in Isfahan. He would strike him on the road in the midst of his entourage. The date was October 14th. 1092. Nizam al-Mulk was traveling from Isfahan to Baghdad. His procession was a city on the move. Soldiers, servants, officials, and a royal litter carrying the Vizier himself. One evening the procession stopped for the night. As the elderly Vizier was being carried from his audience tent to his private harem tent, a man dressed as a Sufi mystic, a wandering holy man, approached the litter. Sufis were common, often seeking alms or offering blessings, so the guards were not immediately alarmed. The mystic, Bedtime, presented a petition, a common way to seek the Vizier's favor. As Nizari leaned forward to take the scroll, Beyutahir lunged. He was not carrying a sword. He had a small, sharp dagger. He plunged it into the vizier's chest. Chaos erupted. The guard, stunned for a fatal second, cut down Beyutahir immediately. But it was too late. The most powerful man in the Seljuk Empire lay dying. The first mission was a success. Beyutahir made no attempt to flee, Jawad says, his eyes meeting yours. His death was part of the sermon. He was the first fighter to achieve martyrdom. His name is honored among us forever. The impact of this single act was catastrophic for the Seljuks. The army besieging Alamut, now leaderless and demoralized, fell into disarray and eventually withdrew. Just a few weeks later, the Sultan Malik Shah also died, some historians whisper of poison, though there is no proof. With both the Sultan and his all-powerful vizier gone in the space of a month, the Seljuk Empire plunged into a decade of civil war as various sons and relatives fought for the throne. The empire, so solid and monolithic under Nizari, fractured. And in the chaos, the Nizari Ismailis state, with Alamut as its capital, was able to consolidate its power, capture more fortresses, and spread its influence. One single man with a dagger had saved Alamut and shattered an empire. This is the power of the doctrine. This is the proof of concept. As you listen, you realize the genius of the plan. It was targeted, symbolic, and perfectly timed. It wasn't just an assassination. It was a political maneuver of the highest order. A strange and often forgotten detail of this event is that Nizari, just before his death, had completed his most famous work, the Siyasat-nama, or the Book of Government. It was a guide for rulers on how to govern effectively. One of its longest chapters is a detailed warning about the dangers of the Ismaili heretics and a plan for their complete eradication. The book was a direct intellectual assault on Hassan's movement. His death, just after its completion, felt like a direct, brutal rebuttal. Hassan-i Sabbah had, in effect, edited the vizier's final chapter. The story of Nizari becomes your blueprint. You study it, dissect it, and learn from it. You learn the importance of timing, of disguise, of choosing the right operative, and of the public nature of the act. The lesson is clear. You are not just a killer. You are not just a killer. You are a tool of history, and your actions, however small, can have consequences that ripple across the world. The lesson of Nizari's demise is a lesson in grand strategy. Now your training must focus on the fine art of making that strategy a reality. The story of Beyutahir is inspiring, but it skips over the most difficult part. How does a man from a remote mountain fortress get close enough to the most powerful vizier in the world to present him with a petition? The answer, you learn, lies in the single most important skill of a fighter: patience. Jawad takes you and the other new devotees back to the mock-up villages and courts deep inside the mountain. Your training in deep cover begins again, but this time it is different. It is no longer about learning to mimic a merchant for a day. It is about learning to be a merchant for 5 years. Anyone can hold their breath for a minute, Jawad says, his voice low and intense. The test is whether you can live your entire life in shallow water, never once betraying that you know how to swim. You are assigned a new identity, not just a name and a backstory, but a complete life. You are to become Farhad, a rug merchant from the city of Ray. Your father was also a rug merchant. Your mother died of a fever. You have 2 brothers, one of whom is a scoundrel, and you have a particular fondness for figs. You are given maps of Ray. You learn the names of its neighborhoods, the reputations of its leading families, the local gossip. You must know this fictional life better than you know your one. Then, for months, you live as Farhad inside Alamut. You interact with other trainees who are living out their own cover identities: a monk from Antioch, a stable hand from Aleppo, a destitute poet from Baghdad. You build relationships, you make deals for imaginary wool, you complain about the price of imaginary wool. It is a strange, elaborate play, but it has a deadly serious purpose. The enemy is not looking for a man with a dagger. Jawad drills into you. They are looking for a man who does not belong. Your task is to belong so complete that you become invisible. You learn that a mission does not begin when you are sent to a city. It begins years before. An agent is sent to a place like Damascus or Isfahan with no other objective than to live there. He will set up a small business, a shop or stall. He will marry, have children, become part of the fabric of the community. He will pay his taxes, attend the mosque, and become a familiar, unremarkable face. He is a sleeper agent. A sleeper agent. A sleeper in the truest sense. He might live this life for 10, even 15 years with no contact from Alamut. He is a seed planted and left to grow. Then one day a traveler will admire a carpet and use a specific, prearranged phrase. The blue in this reminds me of the sky over the Elbrus Mountains. And the shopkeeper, after more than a decade of quiet life, will know he has been activated. His mission might be simple: to report on the movements of a local governor, to map out the interior of a citadel, to befriend a talkative soldier in the city garrison. His mission might be to provide a safe house and a new identity for a freshly arrived fighter as someone like you. This is the vast, patient, and largely invisible network that made the Nizari so effective. Their power was not just in the assassins themselves, but in the support structure that enabled them. This is a crucial detail often missed in the dramatic retellings. For every public act of assassination, there were a dozen quiet acts of intelligence gathering on logistical support. Your training in disguise becomes more nuanced. It's not about costumes, but about subtleties. You learn to change your posture, the cadence of your speech, the way you make eye contact. You are taught how to feign a limp, how to develop a convincing cough, how to appear less intelligent than you are. You could be a merchant, a monk, a madman. The choice of cover was dictated by the target. To get close to a religious leader, you might become a devout student of theology. To get close to a military commander, you might become a humble servant or a supplier for his barracks. A particularly strange and clever tactic you learn about is the prophetic madman. An agent would establish himself in a city as a harmless lunatic, prone to shouting nonsense and dire prophecies in the streets. People would learn to ignore him, to dismiss him as part of the city's chaotic scenery. But his ravings could contain coded messages for other agents. And because he was deemed insane, he could get close to processions and public figures without arousing the same suspicion as a sane man would. It was a brilliant manipulation of social perception. The academic world still puzzles over the full extent of this network. How was it controlled? How were messages passed securely over such vast distances without a formal diplomatic corps? Evidence suggests it was cellular in nature. A fighter in Syria might not know the identity of his counterpart in Persia. This protected the network. The capture of one agent could not lead to the unraveling of the whole system. Hassan-i Sabbah was not just a military leader, he was a master of clandestine organization, building a structure that was both resilient and lethal. The psychological toll of this training is immense. You have to erase your own personality and adopt another, holding on to your true purpose in a tiny, locked box deep inside your mind. You learn that the greatest danger is not being discovered by the enemy, but losing yourself in the role, forgetting the reason you are there. One evening, Jawad dismisses the class. Tomorrow, he says, we will discuss how to turn a threat into a weapon more powerful than a blade. You walk back to your small stone room, the persona of Farhad the rug merchant slowly receding. You look out your window at the endless sea of stars, and for the first time, you truly appreciate the profound loneliness of the path you have chosen. You are to be a ghost, a phantom, a man who lives a dozen lives, but can claim none of them as his own. The next day, Jawad gathers you not in the training rooms, but in a simple, unadorned chamber with a single wooden table. He places a dagger on it, the same kind of simple, functional blade you have been training with. Yesterday, we spoke of becoming someone else for years to achieve a single moment of action, he begins. Today, we speak of achieving the same result with no action at all. We are going to talk about fear. He picks up the dagger. This is a tool. It can end a life. But the idea of this, he holds it up, letting it catch the light from a high window. The idea of this dagger, appearing where it should not be, can be far more powerful. It can end a policy. It can end an alliance. It can end an alliance. It can end a war before it begins. This is the next level of your education, psychological warfare. You are about to learn that the most effective fighter is the one who never has to draw his blade. Jawad tells you a story, not a famous one, like the death of Nizam al-Mulk, but a smaller, more intimate tale that perfectly illustrates the principle. A few years prior, a minor Seljuk emir in a provincial city began a vicious persecution of the local Nizari community. He was ambitious and cruel, hoping to curry favor with the Sultan by showing his zeal. He imprisoned families, seized property, and made it clear he intended to wipe them out completely. An appeal was sent to Alamut. Hassan-i Sabbah could have dispatched a fighter to eliminate the emir. It would have been a simple, straightforward mission. But the Grand Master chose a different path. One of his agents, a man who had spent years establishing himself as a trusted guard within the emir's own citadel, was activated. He was not ordered to strike the emir. He was given a much simpler instruction. One night while the emir was sleeping soundly in his locked, heavily guarded bedchamber, the fighter slipped past the other guards, silently entered the room, and did two things. He plunged an Nizari dagger into the wooden headboard, just inches from the emir's head. Specially baked cake, a type known to be made only in Alamut, on the pillow next to him. Then he slipped out as silently as he had arrived. The next morning the emir awoke. You can imagine his reaction. The cold dread washing over him as he saw the dagger, its blade sunk deep into the wood. The utter confusion as he saw the cake. It was a message of breathtaking arrogance and power. It said, "We can get to you anytime we want. We can get past your locks, past your guards, into your most private space as you sleep. We could have ended you tonight, but we chose not to. Your life is in our hands." And the cake was the signature. The cake said, "This is not a random threat. This is from Alamut." The emir's persecution of the Nizari stopped that day. Immediately, he released his prisoners, returned their property, and never bothered them again. No one was harmed. No blood was shed. A dagger on a pillow and a piece of cake had achieved what a small war could not. A dead man cannot be threatened, George says, his voice flat. But a living man who is terrified is a powerful asset. He can be controlled. He can be influenced. His fear becomes our ally. This tactic was used multiple times, becoming a signature Nizari move. It was a form of soft power, a way of projecting strength far beyond their actual military capabilities. The stories would spread, embellished with each telling, until every ruler who considered moving against the Nizaris had to wonder, how safe is my own bedroom? This uncertainty was a powerful deterrent. Historians find these stories fascinating because they demonstrate a level of sophistication that belies the brutal assassin stereotype. This isn't mindless error, it's calculated political theater. The act itself is less important than the story it creates. The Nizaris were masters of narrative warfare, crafting a legend of supernatural infiltration and omnipresence. However, there's a debate about the authenticity of some of these tales. Are they real historical events? Or are they legends the Nizaris themselves promoted to enhance their fearsome reputation? It's a classic chicken and egg problem. Did the stories arise from the events, or were the stories created to have the same effect as the events themselves? From a strategic perspective, it almost doesn't matter. A believable lie could be just as effective as the truth. Jawad then explains the darker side of this psychological game. Sometimes a threat wasn't enough. An example had to be made, but even then the target was chosen with care. He tells you about the assassination of a vizier who had publicly boasted that he was not afraid and that he would wear armor at all times. Hassan-i Sabbah sent two agents. The first one attacked the vizier in public and was stopped by the vizier's armor and his guards. As the guards were cutting down the first fighter, the second one, who had been part of the chaos and confusion of the crowd, stepped forward and stabbed the vizier in an unprotected spot. The message was clear. Your armor will not save you. Your guards will not save you. Our devotion is greater than your defenses. We will sacrifice one of our own as a feint, just to create the opening for the real attack. The sheer cold-blooded calculus of it was designed to terrify other potential targets. You learn that every mission is a piece of communication. You are not just an executioner, you are a messenger. And your mission's success is not just measured by whether the target is eliminated, but by what message the elimination sends. The lesson sinks in, chilling and profound. The dagger in your hand is only one of your weapons, and perhaps the least important one. Your true arsenal is the human mind itself, its capacity for fear, for doubt, for imagination. You are not just being trained to kill people. You are being trained to kill their sense of security. It's a far more intimate and, in many ways, more terrifying form of warfare. The session ends. You walk out into the courtyard, blinking in the bright mountain sun. You see a guard, a baker, a scholar. And you wonder, which of them are playing a part? The world is no longer a solid, dependable place. It is a stage, and you are learning how to be one of its directors. Your world, which for so long has been the single, focused peak of Alamut, begins to expand. The stories you are told move beyond Persia, traveling west across the great plains of Mesopotamia and into the fractured, war-torn lands of the Levant. You learn that Alamut is not the only Nizari stronghold. The doctrine has spread. The order has a Syrian branch. Jawad unrolls a map on the table. It's a map of Syria and the lands the newcomers from Europe call the outrim of the Crusader states. The map is a chaotic mess of overlapping colors and contested borders. There is the Seljuk territory around Aleppo and Damascus. There is the Sassanid Caliphate's influence from Egypt. And then there are the pockets of land held by the Franks, the Christian knights who stormed into the region a generation ago. The Kingdom of Jerusalem, the Principality of Antioch, the County of Tripoli. This, Jawad says, sweeping his hand over the map, is the most complicated chessboard in the world. A land of 1,000 lords and 1,000 ambitions. And we, he taps a finger on a cluster of mountains in central Syria, are right in the middle of it. He is pointing to the Nizari castles of Syria, Moswayaf, Qa Demos, and others. They are smaller than Alamut, less legendary, but just as strategically vital. You learn that the Syrian branch of the movement was established by missionaries sent from Alamut, but it quickly developed its own character, its own leadership, and its own complex set of alliances. The situation in Syria is nothing like the one in Persia. In Persia, the enemy was clear, the unified Seljuk Empire. In Syria, there is no single enemy. There are dozens of players, and their allegiances shift like the desert sands. The Sunni lord of Aleppo might be your enemy one day and a potential ally against the Crusaders the next. The Crusaders, your supposed ideological foes, might be useful partners in a plot against a rival Muslim emir. It is here, in the crucible of the Crusades, that the Nizar is perfect the art of political maneuvering. You are taught that survival in Syria is not about rigid adherence to ideology, but about pragmatic, calculated balance of power politics. Jawad tells you the story of the first interactions with the Crusaders. At first, the Franks or the Nizar is just another strange local sect, the name their Sunni enemies used and viewed them with a mixture of fear and fascination. The Nizaris, for their part, saw the Crusaders as just another foreign power, no better or worse than the Seljuks. They were a piece on the board to be moved, captured, or allied with as strategy dictated. You learn of a bizarre and controversial incident. At one point, the Syrian Nizar is sent an envoy to the Crusader king of Jerusalem, Amalric. They offered to convert to Christianity in exchange for a military alliance and, more practically, the cancellation of a hefty tribute they were being forced to pay to the local Knights Templar. The king was intrigued, but the Templars, who stood to lose their lucrative tribute payments, were horrified. In a shocking breach of diplomatic protocol, a group of Templar knights ambushed and killed the Nizari envoy on his way home. The king was furious, but the damage was done. The alliance never happened. The story illustrates the sheer pragmatism of the Syrian branch. Their faith was central to their identity, but they were willing to use the idea of conversion as a political tool. Whether they would have actually gone through with it is a question historians debate to this day. Was it a genuine offer, or a masterful piece of political bluffing designed to put pressure on the Templars? This complex dance of diplomacy meant that a fighter in Syria needed a different skill set than one in Persia. He had to be a diplomat and a spy as much as an assassin. An agent might be sent not to kill a Crusader baron, but to his court, to deliver a message, to gauge his intentions, or to subtly feed him misinformation about a mutual enemy. You hear stories of Fidesz operating within the walls of Crusader-held cities like Acre and Tripoli. They would learn Frankish languages, adopt their customs, and work as merchants or servants, gathering intelligence. Their targets were not always Christians. In fact, the Nizaris of Syria killed far more Muslim rivals than they did Crusaders. They assassinated caliphs, viziers, and emirs who threatened their autonomy. Their primary goal was always the preservation and security of their own community, and they would ally with anyone Christian or Muslim to achieve it. This led to a reputation for treachery and duplicity among both Muslims and Christians. The great Sunni chronicler Ibn al-Nizari wrote of them with pure hatred, seeing them as a fifth column among the faithful. The Christian chronicler William of Tyre wrote of them with a kind of terrified awe, describing their leader as a man who held life and death in his hands. Both sides saw them as untrustworthy, but both sides were also, at times, willing to use them to further their own end. One of the more obscure but fascinating aspects of this period is the economic relationship between the Nizaris and their neighbors. While they were political and military rivals, they were also part of the same regional economy. Nizari fortresses, perched on their mountains, controlled key trade routes. They collected tolls and taxes from caravans passing through their territory, including Crusader caravans. There were periods of intense conflict followed by periods of pragmatic truce, where trade and communication would resume. It was a world where you could be trying to assassinate an emir one week and taxing his merchants the next. This Syrian chapter of your education is a lesson in nuance and complexity. The clear-cut, black and white struggle of Persia gives way to a world of endless grey. There are no permanent interests. It forces you to shed any simplistic ideas about a holy war between Islam and Christendom. The reality on the ground was far messier, more cynical, and more fascinating. The Holy Land was a place of unholy alliances, and your order had become one of its most skilled and feared players. The chessboard of Syria was complex, but one player eventually emerged who threatened to sweep all the other pieces from the board. His name was Salah al-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub. To the west, he would become known simply as Saladin. Jawad speaks the name with a unique mix of respect and enmity. He was not like the others, he says. The petty emirs fought for cities. The Crusaders fought for gold and gold. Saladin fought for an idea. The idea of unity. And that made him incredibly dangerous. You learn about Saladin's meteoric rise. A Kurdish officer in the service of the Syrian ruler al-Din. He managed to take control of Egypt, effectively ending the Fatimid Caliphate. After Nur al-Din's death, he moved to consolidate power in Syria, uniting the Muslim forces of Egypt, Syria, and parts of Mesopotamia under his own banner. His stated goal was jihad against the Crusader states, to reclaim Jerusalem for Islam. But to wage a proper holy war, he first needed to eliminate all internal dissent. And in his eyes, the Nizari Ismailis were the most dangerous dissenters of all. They were a rival power center, a Shia sect that rejected his Sunni authority, and a wild card that could not be controlled. Saladin, the great unifier, could not tolerate their independent streak. He decided they had to be destroyed. He launched a campaign against them, laying siege to their great Syrian fortress of Masyaf. It was a serious threat. Saladin was a brilliant military commander, and his army was the most powerful Muslim force the region had seen in generations. The Nizaris were, for once, facing an enemy as strategic and determined as they were. And this is where the story, as Jawad tells it, slips into the realm of legend, a legend that perfectly illustrates the Nizari mastery of psychological warfare. The siege of Masyaf was grinding on. Saladin was confident of victory. One night, he awoke suddenly in his campaign tent. Some accounts say a strange figure was seen leaving the tent just as his guards were aroused. Others say there was no one, but on his bedside table, next to his sleeping place, was a disturbing tableau. There were hot scones, a distinctively Nizari style of bread, a poisoned dagger, and a piece of paper with a poem written on it. The poem was a direct threat, its verses chillingly clear. It informed Saladin that the hand that could place these items in his guarded tent could just as easily have plunged the dagger into his heart. This was the dagger on the pillow tactic taken to a whole new level. It was a direct, personal message to the most powerful man in the Muslim world. But was it true? Did a fide-eye really penetrate the heart of Saladin's military camp and enter his personal tent? Historians are deeply divided on this. Pro-Nizari sources and later legends tell the story as fact, a testament to their incredible skill. Saladin's own chroniclers, understandably, are silent on such an embarrassing security breach. They give a different reason for the end of the siege. They claim Saladin lifted the siege because he needed to redeploy his forces to deal with a new Crusader threat elsewhere. Some modern historians suggest a more pragmatic reason. Saladin's uncle, the ruler of Hama, may have interceded on the Nizari's behalf, brokering a truce to protect his own flank. The Nizaris were, after all, his neighbors. Does it matter how the dagger got there? Jawad asks you a rhetorical question. Does it matter if it was a ghost in the night or an uncle's plea? The message was delivered. Saladin understood. The story of the first attempt on Saladin's life is less legendary and more of a straightforward failure. A group of fighters, disguised as members of his own troops, tried to attack him during a siege. Saladin was wearing a full suit of mail and a protective helmet, with a face guard. The assassins managed to get close, but their dagger blows glanced off his helmet. He was saved by his armor. The assassins were cut down. The second attempt was even more audacious. Again, fighters disguised themselves as his soldiers. This time, one of them got close enough to slash at Saladin's face and neck. The blow cut through his padded coif but was again stopped by the chainmail underneath, leaving him with only minor wounds. A bloody melee ensued in his tent as his personal Mamluk bodyguards fought and killed the attackers. Saladin was shaken, but alive. 2 failed attempts, and then the legendary warning in his tent at Moswaif. Whether by fear, diplomacy, or strategic necessity, Saladin changed his policy. He lifted the siege of Moswaif. He never attacked the Nizaris again. A quiet, informal truce was established. They would leave him alone to fight his great war against the Crusaders, and he would leave them alone in their mountain fortresses. It was a stunning victory for the Nizaris. They had faced the most powerful Muslim ruler of the age and fought him to a standstill, not with an army, but with a handful of daring agents under terrifying reputation. They had proven that even the great Saladin was not untouchable. A bizarre, almost comical footnote to this story is the relationship that followed. Once the truce was in place, Saladin and the leader of the Syrian Nizaris seemed to develop a grudging respect for one another. There are even accounts suggesting that during Saladin's long war with Richard the Lionheart, the Nizaris may have acted as intermediaries, or even quiet allies of Saladin, using their intelligence network to keep him informed of the Crusaders' movement. It was another example of the Nizari's ultimate pragmatism. Today's mortal enemy could be tomorrow's strategic partner. The lesson for you, the trainee, is profound. You learn that even failure can be a form of success. The 2 failed assassination attempts, while not achieving their primary goal, still contributed to the legend. They proved the Nizaris' willingness to strike, their ability to get close. They laid the psychological groundwork for the final, possibly mythical, threat at Moswaif. They showed that even a man like Saladin had to take them seriously. They had stared into the eyes of the lion and made him blink. As you delve deeper into the history of the Syrian branch, one name begins to overshadow all others, even Hassan-i Sabbah's. It is the name of the man who faced down Saladin, the man who perfected the art of Syrian realpolitik, the man who became a legend in his own right. His name is Rashid al-Din Sinan. Jawad speaks of him with a different tone than he uses for Hassan-i Sabbah. For Hassan, it is pure, unadulterated reverence. For Sinan, there is reverence, but it is mixed with a sense of awe at his audacity and sheer political genius. If the Grandmaster Hassan was our philosopher, Jawad says, then Sinan was our Grandmaster of the game. Rashid al-Din Sinan was not Syrian by birth. Like Hassan-i Sabbah, he was a Persian born near Basra. And like Hassan, he He was educated at Alamut itself. You can imagine him as a young man, sitting in these same lecture halls, training in these same courtyards. He was a brilliant student, excelling in theology, philosophy, and the practical art of the third eye. Hassan-i Sabbah had been dead for many years by the time Sinan came of age, but the successive Grand Masters of Alamut recognized his talent. They saw in him the perfect combination of intellect, charisma, and ruthlessness needed to lead the chaotic Syrian branch. So, in the 1162, he was sent from Persia to Syria. His journey itself is the stuff of legend. He traveled in disguise, not as a great leader, but as a simple merchant, making his way through hostile territory, quietly observing, learning, and making contact with the scattered Nizari communities. When he finally arrived at the Syrian headquarters at Mosyf, he did not immediately announce himself as the new leader sent from Alamut. Instead, he maintained his cover, living among the local Nizaris, earning their trust and respect through his wisdom and piety. Only when he had established his personal authority did he reveal his commission from the Grand Master. This tells you everything you need to know about his methods. He was patient, subtle, and understood that true authority is earned, not just declared. Under Sinan's leadership, the Syrian Nizaris became a major power. He was a master of diplomacy, playing the Seljuk emirs, the Crusader lords, and Saladin against each other with breathtaking skill. He consolidated the Nizari holdings, strengthening their fortresses and streamlining their intelligence network until it was the most feared and respected in the Levant. He was also the man who truly became the old man of the mountain for the Crusaders. When Christian chroniclers wrote about the terrifying leader of the assassins who could command absolute obedience, it was Sinan they were describing. He cultivated this image deliberately, understanding the power of myth. He was a remote, mysterious figure who rarely left his fortress at Mosyf, yet his influence was felt in every court in the Holy Land. Here, however, Jawad introduces a point of significant historical controversy: how independent was Sinan from Alamut? The official doctrine, of course, was that Sinan was merely the deputy of the Supreme Grand Master in Persia. He was an agent carrying out the will of his superior. But the reality, as Jawad subtly hints, may have been more complicated. The distance between Syria and Persia was vast, and communication was slow and dangerous. Sinan was forced to make decisions on his own, reacting to events in real time. Over his nearly 30 years of rule in Syria, he developed his own policies, his own alliances, and his own distinct style. Some historians argue that Sinan effectively ran the Syrian branch as his own personal fiefdom. They point to instances where his policies seemed to diverge from those of Alamut. He engaged in theological innovations and political maneuvers that might not have been fully sanctioned by the Persian leadership. There are even tantalizing hints in some texts of friction between Sinan and the Grand Master of the time. Was he a loyal subordinate, or a brilliant and ambitious leader who, while respecting Alamut, essentially went his own way? The truth is likely somewhere in the middle. He probably never renounced his allegiance to the central leadership, but the practical realities of governing in a war zone 1,000 miles away gave him a degree of autonomy that was unprecedented. He was the man on the ground, and his word was law. One of the most peculiar stories about Sinan, a piece of obscure lore, involves his use of doubles and decoys. He was a master of personal security. He was so paranoid about assassination attempts against himself, he knew better than anyone what his own organization was capable of, that he was said to employ men who looked like him to appear in public. He rarely met with outsiders, and when he did, the visitor could never be sure if they were speaking to the real Sinan or stand-in. He built a mystique around himself, becoming a phantom, a ghost in his own castle. He was everywhere and nowhere. This obsession with secrecy extended to his communications. He developed a sophisticated system of carrier pigeons and coded messages to communicate between his network of fortresses in Syria. He created a hierarchy of messengers so that no single person knew the full extent of his plans. Sinan's legacy is a dual one. To the outside world, both Muslim and Christian, he was the archetypal assassin leader, a shadowy, terrifying figure who dealt in death and intrigue. But to his own people, he was a protector and a unifier. He gave the Syrian Nizari community a sense of identity and security in a hostile world. He was their shield. His death in 1193, shortly after the death of his great rival Saladin, marked the end of an era. He had led his people through the most dangerous period of their history, navigating the treacherous currents of the Crusades and the rise of a military genius. He left the Syrian branch of the order more powerful and more respected than he had found it. As you absorb the story of Rashid al-Din Sinan, you realize that the path of a fighter is not just one of sacrifice and battle. It can also be one of immense power and influence. Sinan was proof that one man, with the right mix of intelligence, charisma, and utter ruthlessness, could not just survive on the world's most dangerous chessboard, but could, for a time, become one of its most important pieces. After so many stories of grand strategy, political intrigue, and legendary assassinations, Jawad shifts the focus of your education once more. He leads you out of the dark lecture rooms and into the bustling heart of Alamut itself. You have learned how we fight, he says, his voice softer than usual. Now you must understand what we are fighting for. You have studied the body's pressure points. Now you must study its heart. For the next few weeks, you are assigned not to a spy master, but to a quartermaster. Your tasks are mundane, almost indulgently so after your specialized training. You help distribute grain from the storehouses. You spend a day with the engineers inspecting the cisterns and water channels. You help a stonimus unrepair a section of wall damaged by the winter frost. At first you are confused, even a little resentful. Are you not a fighter, a honed weapon? Why are you counting sacks of barley? But slowly you begin to understand the lesson. The legends and the fear are what the outside world sees. But the reality of Alamut, the day-to-day existence, is a triumph of community, engineering, and sheer, stubborn survival. The fortress is not just a military base, it's a home. A small, vertical city. You see families who have lived here for generations. You watch children playing in the courtyards, their laughter echoing off the ancient stone. Their fathers and mothers are not all spies and assassins. They are bakers, weavers, librarians, and farmers. The vast majority of people in Alamut will never hold a dagger or go on a secret mission. Their role is to keep the heart of the community beating. The farming is what impresses you the most. How do you feed a population of hundreds, possibly thousands, on a barren mountaintop? The answer is a marvel of agricultural ingenuity. Every square foot of Alamut in the surrounding valleys controlled by the Nizaris is cultivated. They have created a system of terraced gardens, painstakingly built and irrigated, where they grow vegetables, grains, and fruit. They raise goats for milk and cheese, and keep bees for honey. This self-sufficiency was Hassan-i Sabbah's masterstroke. He knew that a fortress that depended on outside supply lines was a fortress that could be starved into submission. By making Alamut and its satellite culturally independent, he made them nearly immune to traditional siege warfare. The Seljuks could surround the mountain for years, but as long as the rains came and the crops grew, the people inside could survive. You also gain a new appreciation for the fortress's library. You had seen it as an armory of knowledge for training agents. Now you see it for what it truly is: a university. It's a center for the preservation and advantage. The scholars here are not just studying espionage. They are translating Greek philosophical texts, making advances in medicine and astronomy, and writing poetry. This intellectual vibrancy is a core part of the Nizari identity. They are protecting not just their bodies, but their minds from the rigid orthodoxy of the outside world. One of the strangest and least known aspects of life in Alamut is its economy. How did this isolated community sustain itself? Part of the answer is tribute and taxes from the lands they controlled. But there's also evidence of a sophisticated internal economy. They had their own artisans, their own craftsmen. An interesting historical theory, though one debated by scholars, is that Alamut may have produced goods for trade. Could a finely bound book from the Alamut scriptorium, or a complex piece of metalwork, have found its way to a market in Ray or Isfahan, its origins unknown to the buyer? It's a tantalizing idea that the fortress wasn't just a consumer, but a producer quietly participating in the economy of the very empire it sought to undermine. The social structure is also eye-opening. Within the walls of Alamut, the rigid class hierarchies of the outside world, seem to have been softened. Your status is determined not by your birth, but by your skill, your knowledge, and your devotion to the community. A scholar is as revered as a warrior. A farmer is as essential as a strategist. This relative egalitarianism was one of the reasons the Ismaili message was so appealing to the poor and disenfranchised of Persia. It offered them a dignity and a sense of purpose that the feudal Seljuk system denied them. This period of manual labor and quiet observation changes you in a way the spy training did not. It grounds you. It connects you to the people you have sworn to protect. The missions are no longer abstract exercises in political strategy. They are about protecting the laughing children in the courtyard, the old man tending his beehives, the young woman illuminating a manuscript in the library. You realize that the myth of the assassins, the dark, terrifying spectre, is a shield. It is a weaponized reputation that allows this small, vibrant community to survive in a world that wants to crush it. They project an image of ruthless, single-minded killers so that they can be left alone to read their books, grow their gardens, and raise their families in peace. Jawad finds you at the end of your assignment, watching the sunset paint the mountain peaks in hues of orange and purple. "Do you see now?" he asks. Every time a fighter steps out into the world, he carries all of this with him. This is the secret we keep, not the location of our fortresses or the names of our agents. The secret is that our greatest strength is not our daggers, but our community. You look back at the fortress, its lights beginning to glow in the twilight. It no longer looks like a nest of eagles, a place of predators. It looks like a sanctuary, a fragile, impossible, and beautiful home. And you understand, with a clarity that settles deep in your bones, that you would do anything to protect it. Your immersion into the practical life of the fortress gives you a new perspective. Now, Jawad begins to systematically dismantle some of the more lurid myths you might have heard, the tales told by your enemies to demonize the order. He brings you back to a small lecture room, a place for correcting the record. "Our enemies call us fanatics," he begins. "They say we are drunk on hashish and promises of paradise. They paint us as monstrous. A monster is easy to hate. It is also predictable. We are not monsters. We are strategists, and a strategist uses the most effective tool for the job. Nothing more, nothing less." He leans forward, his expression serious, which brings us to the matter of poison. In the stories told in the bazaars of Aleppo and the courts of Europe, the assassins are masters of toxicology. They are depicted as shadowy figures who can kill with a pinch of powder in a cup of wine, a drop of venom on a blade, or a tainted piece of fruit. The fear of poison was pervasive in the medieval world and invisible, terrifying death that could strike anyone, no matter how powerful. Attributing this skill to the Nizaris amplified their mystique and their fearsome reputation. It is a useful reputation to have, Jawad concedes with a wry smile. Let them check their food. Let them hire taste testers. Let their fear make every meal an ordeal. It is a wonderful form of psychological pressure. He pauses, then states the truth bluntly. But we almost never use it. In the entire history of our struggle, the number of confirmed poisonings carried out by the Order can be counted on one hand, and even those are debated. You are taken aback. This flies in the face of all the popular legends. Think about it strategically, Jawad urges. Why do we strike? We strike to send a message, a public proclamation. When a man dies of a sudden sickness, what is the message? It's a whisper, a rumor. Did you hear the Emir died? They say it was a fever, but my cousin's friend heard it might have been the assassins. It creates uncertainty, but it lacks clarity. It is an unsigned declaration. But when a man is struck down in a crowded mosque, in front of hundreds of witnesses by a man who shouts our name and makes no attempt to flee, that is a message written in bold letters. It is delivered. There is no doubt who sent it and why. It is a sermon. Poison is a coward's tool. The dagger is a priest's. This is a stunning revelation. The Nizar is preferred weapon. The dagger was chosen precisely because it was personal, public, and undeniable. It required the fighter eye to get terrifyingly close to the target, to look them in the eye. The act itself was a testament to the agent's bravery and devotion. Poison allowed for distance, for anonymity, and anonymity was the one thing the Nizaris did not want in their major assassinations. They wanted the credit. They wanted the fear that came with a known and visible enemy. The historical record largely backs this up. While accusations of poisoning were common, it was a convenient explanation for any sudden political death. Concrete evidence linking the Nizaris to these deaths is almost non-existent. The chronicles, both Muslim and Christian, are filled with detailed accounts of stabbings. The tales of poison, by contrast, are vague and folkloric. Jawad explains the rare exceptions. Could poison be used to neutralize a minor obstacle? They guard. A minor official whose quiet removal would facilitate a larger mission. Perhaps. It is a tool in the chest, but a messy one. It is unreliable. It can be detected. It can fail. The dagger, in the hands of a trained fighter eye, does not fail. This rejection of poison reveals a core part of the Nizari psychological profile. They were not interested in what modern strategists would call plausible deniability. They practiced implausible deniability. They wanted their actions to be so audacious, so clearly their handiwork, that no one could possibly deny their involvement. It was the ultimate power move. A little-known but fascinating detail of the period is the science of poisons itself. In the medieval Islamic world, toxicology was a subject of serious study, intertwined with alchemy and medicine. Scholars wrote treatises on different types of venoms, animal, plant, and mineral, and their supposed antidotes. The most famous of these was the duriac, a complex compound of dozens of ingredients believed to be a universal antidote. Rulers and wealthy nobles would pay fortunes for it. By cultivating a reputation as master poisoners, the Nizaris were tapping into a deep, pre-existing cultural anxiety. They didn't invent the fear of poison, but they were more than happy to have it associated with their name. The lesson today is one of strategic branding. The Nizaris understood that their reputation was their most powerful weapon. They actively cultivated that were useful: the fear, the infiltration, the absolute devotion, while privately adhering to a much more pragmatic and focused operational doctrine. They let their enemies believe they used poison because that fear was a weapon in itself, a soft form of terror that cost them nothing. Let the world believe we are sorcerers who can kill with a whisper, Jawad concludes. We know the truth. We are men of faith and reason, and our chosen instrument is not a hidden powder, but a simple, honest piece of steel. You leave the lecture hall with a new appreciation for the layers of deception at play. The Nizaris wrap themselves in a cloak of myth, a cloak they have woven themselves from the fears of their enemies. You are being taught not just to see through the myths, but to understand their strategic purpose. You are learning to wield the story as skillfully as the blade. An assassination is the final, loudest word in a long conversation, Jawad tells you one morning. But for that word to have meaning, it must be preceded by thousands of whispers. Today we talk about the whispers. He leads you not to a training room or a lecture hall, but to one of the highest towers in Alamut. It's a watchtower offering a breathtaking 360-degree view of the surrounding mountains and the valleys that snake between them. From here you can see the faint, dusty lines of trade routes far below. A fighter eye is a dagger, Jawad says, his eyes scanning the horizon. But a dagger is blind. It must be guided. The guidance comes from our greatest and most secret weapon. Our intelligence network. The eyes and ears of Alamut. You learn that the Order's ability to strike with such precision was not based on luck or supernatural abilities. It was based on superior information. Hassan-i Sabbah and his successors were not just spy masters, they were pioneers of intelligence analysis. The network was vast and decentralized. It was not a formal organization of uniformed spies. Instead, it was a web of human sources woven into the very fabric of society across the Middle East. Who is the most invisible man in a city? Jawad asks you. You think for a moment, a beggar, a servant. Good, he nods. But who is invisible, yet also welcome everywhere? Who can travel from city to city without suspicion? Who hears the gossip of the court and the complaints of the common soldier? The answer dawns on you. A merchant. Precisely, Jawad confirms, and scholars, and physicians, and poets. The Nizari intelligence network was built upon its own people. the Ismaili diaspora scattered across Persia, Syria, and beyond. These were not all trained agents. Most were ordinary people living ordinary lives, but they were bound by a shared faith and a shared sense of persecution. They were the eyes and ears. A Nizari textile merchant in Isfahan might overhear a conversation in the bazaar about a new tax that is making the local garrison unhappy. A physician reading a minor court official in Aleppo might learn of the rivalries and factions within the emir's government. A scholar visiting a library in Baghdad might note which books are being studied by the caliph's advisors. None of this information is earth-shattering on its own. It is just gossip, data, noise. But this raw intelligence would be passed along the network through a chain of trusted contacts, other merchants on the road, pilgrims, traveling days until it eventually reached a regional center, and from there to Alamut itself. Here in the fortress, in rooms you never knew existed, this information was collated, cross-referenced, and analyzed. The scholars of Alamut were not just reading philosophy. They were some of the world's first dedicated intelligence analysts. They would create detailed profiles of key figures, their habits, their allies, their enemies, their weaknesses, their fears. They would map out the political landscape of a rival city as accurately as they would map its physical streets. So when a decision was made to target a specific individual, it was based on an incredible depth of knowledge. The FIDI assigned to the mission would be briefed not just on the target's location, but on his entire life. He would know the layout of the palace, the names of the guards, the one day of the week the target visited a particular mosque, the fact that he was terrified of thunderstorms. This level of detail was what made their missions so successful. It wasn't magic, it was meticulous, patient, and brilliant intelligence work. A fascinating and obscure aspect of this network was its use of non-Nizaris. The order was not above buying information. A disgruntled soldier, a court eunuch passed over for promotion, a merchant in debt, these were all potential sources. The Nizaris developed a reputation for paying well and reliably for useful information, turning the corruption and discontent within their enemies' systems into a weapon against them. The historical debate here centers on how centralized this system truly was. Did Hassan-i Sabbah sit at the center of this web like a spider, with all threads leading directly to him? Or was it a more organic, bottom-up system, where local communities gathered information for their own protection, and only the most vital intelligence was passed up the chain to the central leadership? The answer is likely a combination of both. A formal structure for high-level intelligence, and an informal, community-based network for everything else. Jawad points down to a thin, dusty trail in the distance. See that road? A caravan will pass along it in a few hours. It carries silks from China. The merchant leading it is a Sunni from Nizari, but his chief camel driver is one of us. And he will carry a message, memorized and hidden in a poem, to our contact in Kazvin. The message: the governor of Nizari has a new food taster, a man with a gambling problem. Is that information useful? Maybe not today, but we will file it away. Every piece of knowledge is a stone. You never know which one will become the cornerstone of a future plan. This changes your entire perception of the order. The image of the fanatical assassin, driven by blind faith, dissolves. It is replaced by the image of a cool, calculating analyst, patiently assembling a mosaic of information. The act of assassination was the final, violent expression of a long, quiet, and deeply intellectual process. You understand now why your training began in the library. A FIDI was not just a weapon. He was the final component of a complex intelligence-gathering machine. He was the synthesis of the scholar's mind and the warrior's hand. To be effective, he had to be both. The eyes and the ears provided the knowledge. It was his job to provide the voice. Time in Alamut flows differently. Seasons change, marked by the first snow on the high peaks or the blossoming of the apricot trees in the terraces, but the mission remains constant. Decades pass. You are no longer a new recruit. The fire of youth has tempered into the steady flame of experience. You have undertaken missions of your own, living as other men in other cities. Your heart a cold, locked box of purpose. You have returned sometimes to the eagle's nest to rest, to train others, to be reminded of what you fight for. One day, a quiet pall falls over the fortress. The usual hum of activity softens to a whisper. The laughter of the children seems muted. You see people gathering in small, solemn groups, their faces etched with a profound sadness. Hassan-i Sabbah is dead. He died not from a dagger or poison, the tools of his trade, but peacefully in his bed, an old man of nearly 90. His end was as quiet and controlled as his life. He had been ill for some time, and he used that time to ensure a smooth transition of power. You gather in the main courtyard with the entire population of the fortress. Ahmed, the man who was once your teacher, the man Hassan himself had chosen as his successor, stands before you. He is old now too, his beard as white as Hassan's had been, but his voice is strong as he officially announces the passing of the Grand Master. There is a collective sigh, a wave of grief that seems to ripple through the stone itself. Hassan-i Sabbah was more than a leader. He was the founder, the architect, the visionary. He was the man who had led them out of persecution and into this mountain sanctuary. For many, he was the only leader they had ever known. His presence was woven into the very identity of Alamut. It feels as if the mountain itself has lost its peak. This is a moment of immense vulnerability. The death of a charismatic, foundational leader is often a moment of crisis for a movement. Will it fracture? Will rivals fight for control? The Seljuks would surely see this as an opportunity, a sign of weakness. But Hassan, the master strategist, had planned for his own death as meticulously as he had planned any other operation. He had spent years grooming Ahmed, ensuring that his authority was recognized and accepted by all. The succession is seamless. There is no power struggle, no chaos. The machine that Hassan built continues to run smoothly. Ahmed is the new Grand Master. The mission continues. Yet, something has changed. The era of the founder is over. The era of the institution has begun. Historians often debate the impact of a founder's death on a revolutionary movement. Some movements collapse, unable to survive without their singular, charismatic leader. Others become more rigid, more bureaucratic, as they try to codify the founder's vision. The Nizaris, it seems, managed to institutionalize the charisma. The loyalty was not just to the man, Hassan-i Sabbah, but to the office of the Grand Master and the Ismaili cause he represented. This allowed the movement to endure for another 150 years after his death. In the days that follow, you listen to the stories being told about Hassan. They are already becoming legends. His austerity, his intellect, his unwavering devotion. One of the most famous and historically debated stories about him is that he ordered the execution of both of his own sons. One was executed for drinking wine, a violation of religious law. The other was executed on suspicion of involvement in the murder of another day. Jawad, his face grim, confirms the tales are true. He applied the law to his own family as strictly as he did to any other, he says. He showed no favoritism. The cause was greater than blood. It was a harsh lesson, but it was a necessary one. It proved that no one was above the community. The historical veracity of these events is questioned by some modern scholars. They argue the stories might be later embellishments, propaganda designed to showcase House absolute and almost inhuman sense of justice. Whether literal fact or powerful legend, the story serves its purpose. It cements the image of a leader so devoted to his principles that he would sacrifice his own children for them. It sent a powerful message to his followers. If he could demand this of himself, what could he not demand of you? Under Ahmed, and later his son, the Nizari state continues to function and even expand. They continue the struggle against the Seljuks, capturing more castles, sending out more fidayers. The methods are the same. The doctrine is unchanged. But you can feel a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The revolutionary fire of the early days has cooled into a more established, more predictable rhythm. Alamut feels less like a desperate rebellion and more like a permanent, alternative state. The fight for survival has become a way of life. You look at the new generation of recruits, their faces young and full of fervor, and you see yourself so many years ago. You have become one of the old guard, a keeper of the original flame. Your role now is not just to be a weapon, but to be a memory, to ensure that the vision of the first old man of the mountain is not forgotten. You tell the new recruits the stories you were told of Nizam al-Mulk, of the great library. The passing of Hassan-i Sabbah marks a turning point. The movement has proven it can outlive its founder. It has become something more enduring, something more formidable. It is no longer just a dream of one brilliant, revolutionary mind. It is a nation with its own territory, its own laws, and its own unyielding purpose, hidden away in the high, lonely places of the world. Life under the new Grandmasters settles into a rhythm of constant, low-level warfare. The great empire-shattering strikes of Hassan's era become less frequent, replaced by a steady campaign of consolidation and defense. But as you learn, the threat to Alamut does not always come from a besieging army. Sometimes, the threat walks right through the front gate. Jawad, now a venerable, unrespected elder within the fortress, gathers a group of you veteran fighters for a different kind of lesson. This one is about internal security. We have taught the world to fear the wolf that walks in sheep's clothing, he says, his voice a low growl. We have become so good at it, we sometimes forget that other flocks have wolves of their own. He is talking about counter-espionage. The Nizars were not the only ones who understood the power of infiltration. Their enemies, particularly the Seljuks, eventually learned from their own painful experience. They began trying to turn the Nizar, his greatest weapon, against them. They started sending their own spies to Alamut. The challenge for any enemy agent was immense. First, they had to fake a conversion to the Nizari Ismaili faith, a process that involved deep theological study and examination by eagle-eyed days. They had to be convincing enough in their devotion to be accepted by a community that was, by its very nature, deeply suspicious of outsiders. Then they had to undertake the same journey you did, the perilous climb to the fortress itself. If they managed all of that, they faced the final, most difficult challenge. Living inside Alamut, under the constant scrutiny of some of the world's most paranoid and perceptive people, without making a single mistake. It was a nearly impossible task. Yet, some tried. Jawad tells you the story of a young man who arrived a few years ago, claiming to be a refugee from a Seljuk crackdown in the city of Hamadan. He was bright, devout, and seemingly passionate about the cause. He passed all the initial tests. He was brought to Alamut and began his training just as you did. But one of the librarians, an old man whose only job was to copy and care for manuscripts, noticed something odd. The recruit, while a brilliant student of theology, seemed to have a particular, almost obsessive interest in a specific set of maps detailing the lesser-known water sources and secret postern gates of the Syrian castles. It was a subtle thing, an intellectual curiosity, that was just slightly too focused. The librarian didn't raise an alarm. That was not the way of Alamut. Instead, he quietly mentioned it to a superior. A silent, invisible investigation began. The recruit was watched. His movements were tracked. They gave him more rope, letting him believe he was succeeding, even giving him access to more sensitive, but slightly altered documents. The trap was sprung months later. The recruit was caught trying to send a message out of the fortress with a visiting merchant who was, of course, a loyal Nizari agent. The message contained detailed, but deliberately flawed, information about the defenses of Mos Yif. The recruit was a Seljuk spy. His fate was swift and quiet. There was no public trial. He simply disappeared. This story highlights the Nizari's greatest defense against infiltration: their own culture. They were a small, tightly knit community. Everyone knew everyone else. A stranger's habits. A slight change in routine, a question that was just a little too probing, these things stood out in a way they wouldn't in a large, anonymous city. Their paranoia was their immune system. However, the historical record is not entirely one-sided. There is a fascinating and often debated question among scholars. Did any spies ever succeed? The Nizari sources, for obvious reasons, do not adverse their security failures. But some enemy chroniclers claim that Seljuk agents did manage to infiltrate the order and, in some cases, even carry out counter-assassinations, killing keen Nizari days or commanders. One of the most intriguing unshadowy groups involved in the spy versus spy world was another secret society. The Seljuks, frustrated by their inability to fight the Nizaris conventionally, are thought to have developed their own clandestine organizations. These groups, often staffed by former soldiers and intelligence officers, were tasked with mirroring the Nizari's methods, gathering intelligence, spreading disinformation, and attempting their own targeted killings. It was a secret war fought in the shadows between two sets of ghosts. A particularly strange and obscure detail you learn is about the testing of loyalty. Sometimes a potential recruit who was suspected of being an enemy agent would be given a fake mission. They would be ordered to assassinate a target who was, in fact, another Nizari agent playing a role. The test was to see if the recruit would carry out the order with conviction, or if they would try to warn the target or sabotage the mission. It was a deadly game of bluffs and counter-bluffs, designed to expose a person's true allegiance. This constant threat from within, this possibility that the man training next to you could be a spy, bred each sense of caution. It's one of the reasons the Nizar is operated on a need-to-know basis. A fighter I was only given the information essential for his specific mission. He would not know the identities of other agents, or the details of other operations. This cellular structure meant that even if a spy did manage to get inside, the damage they could do was limited. The lesson for you as a veteran is clear. Complacency is the greatest enemy. The skills you use to deceive others can also be used to deceive you. You must remain as vigilant inside the walls of Alamut as you are in the streets of Isfahan. The war has two fronts. One outside the gates, and one within your own ranks. And the quiet war of whispers, of hidden loyalties and suspected betrayals, is often the more dangerous one. Jawad gathers you for what he says is one of the most important lessons. He looks older now, the lines on his face carved deeper by time and secrets. We have spoken of our enemies' spies, he says. But their most effective weapon against us has never been a dagger or a spy. It has been a word. A single slanderous word that has followed us for a century and will likely follow us for 1,000 years. He pauses, letting you feel the weight of his statement. Today, we must talk about hashish. A murmur goes through the room. You have all heard the stories. They are the favorite tales of your enemies whispered in every tavern and marketplace from Syria to Persia. The stories Marco Polo would later make world famous. They say that you are the hashish in the hashish eaters. They claim your fighters are not brave, but simply drugged out of their minds, sent to their deaths in a narcotic haze, their heads filled with promises of a sensual paradise. It is the single most pervasive and damaging myth about the order. It strips you of your agency, your faith, your intellect. It turns your sacred devotion into a chemically induced stupor. It is a lie that is simple, memorable, and deeply insulting. Look around you, Jawad says, his voice filled with a rare, cold anger. Look at this fortress. Look at our library. Look at our engineering. Do these look like the works of men lost in a drug-fueled dream? We are strategists, scientists, theologians, and survivors. Our minds are our sharpest weapons. To dull them with a narcotic would be the equivalent of a swordsman intentionally blunting his own blade. It is tactical suicide. He then proceeds to dismantle the myth piece by piece, with the precision of a scholar. First, the name itself. The term Hashishin. It was never our name, he states flatly. It is a name our enemies gave us. A slur, a term of abuse used by Sunni chroniclers and crusader priests. They used it to dehumanize us, to make us seem alien and monstrous. The etymology of the word assassin, as you've heard before, is one of history's great puzzles. Most modern scholars now believe that Hashishin was indeed a derogatory label applied to the Nizaris, but that it didn't literally mean they used the drug. In the cultural context of the time, calling someone a hashish eater was a common insult, similar to calling someone a social outcast, a madman, or an unbeliever. It was a way of saying they were outside the bounds of respectable society. The connection to the actual substance may have been purely metaphorical. Jawad offers the alternative theory, the one favored within the walls of Alamut. Some say the name comes from as a Siyun, he explains, meaning people of the foundation, those who are true to the as the foundation of the faith, a name of honor, twisted by our enemies into an insult. Second, the practical argument. Think of the missions, he urges. A fighter must live undercover for years. He must be a master of disguise language and social interaction. He must have a perfect memory for details, a sharp mind for strategy, and lightning-fast reflexes at the final moment. Are these the qualities of a man habitually using hashish? No. They are the exact opposite. The legend simply makes no tactical sense. A drugged agent would be a liability, not an asset. He would be clumsy, forgetful, and easily discovered. The entire Nizari method was based on disciplined patience and mental clarity. The hashish story is a direct contradiction of everything you know to be true about your training and doctrine. So where did the story come from? It is a comforting lie for our enemies. Jawad explains, when a great vizier or a powerful emir is struck down in his own fortress, surrounded by his guards, it is terrifying. It suggests a failure of their power, a weakness in their system. It is much easier for them to believe the killer was not a brilliant, devoted, and highly trained operative. It is much more comforting to believe he was a brainwashed fool, high on drugs, with no fear of death because his mind had been stolen from him. It's a classic case of propaganda. The myth absolves the Nizar as victims of any security failings and simultaneously robs the Nizar is of their intellectual and spiritual strength. It turns a sophisticated act of political warfare into a simple act of crazed fanaticism. A little-known detail is that the use of hashish was, in fact, associated with other, more mystical and Antiniaman Sufi sects of the period. It's possible that the Nizar's enemies simply conflated them with these other groups, either out of ignorance or deliberate malice. By lumping all heretical and socially marginal groups together, they could paint them all with the same disreputable brush. The lesson of the hashish myth is a bitter one. It teaches you that the truth is a fragile thing. A powerful, well-told lie can be more influential than 1,000 inconvenient facts. You can win on the battlefield. You can win in the political arena, but the war for your own story, for your own reputation, is the hardest one of all. You learn that your enemies will not just try to kill your body, they will try to kill your character, to poison your legacy for all time. So when you hear this word, Jawad concludes, his voice dropping to a near whisper, when they call you a hashishin, do not be angered. Pity them for their need to believe in such fantasies. And let it remind you that our greatest shield is not secrecy or strength of arms, but the truth of our purpose. Live that truth, and let the lies of others fall away like dust. But as you walk away, a chilling thought occurs to you. What if the lie is stronger? What if, centuries from now, the only thing the world remembers about you is the slander, while the library, the philosophy, and the struggle for justice are all forgotten? It's a battle you may never truly win. Decades have passed since the death of Hassan-i Sabbah. The fortress of Alamut is now under the command of his grandson, Hassan-i. The world outside has changed, and a strange, electric tension begins to build within the walls of the Nizari strongholds. The older generation, men like Jawad, have grown quiet and watchful. A new, radical interpretation of the faith is beginning to circulate among the younger members of the community. You are now one of the veterans, a man whose hair is streaked with grey. You have seen leaders come and go. You believe you have seen everything. You are about to be proven wrong. The Grand Master, Hassan-i, is a very different man from his father and grandfather. They were pragmatists, politicians, and military leaders. Hassan-i is a mystic, or philosopher, a man consumed by theology and esoteric interpretation. He has spent years poring over the Ismaili texts in the Great Library, and he has arrived at a revolutionary conclusion. Rumors begin to fly around the fortress. Whispers of a great announcement to come. The days are preaching with a new fervor, speaking of a spiritual dawn, the end of one era and the beginning of another. Then the summons comes. The entire community of Alamut is to gather in the main prayer ground. A special platform has been erected, facing away from Mecca. This detail alone sends a shockwave through the community. To turn one's back on the traditional direction of prayer is a profound, symbolic act. On the 17th day of Ramadan, in the year 1164, Hassan-i ascends the platform. He is dressed in white, the color of purity, but also, ominously, the color of the Fatimid caliphs his ancestors had broken away from. He addresses the crowd, his voice ringing with messianic certainty. He declares that the era of the Sharia, the exoteric religious law that governs the daily life of all Muslims, is over. He proclaims the arrival of the Qiyamah, the Great Resurrection. This is not a resurrection of the dead from their graves. It is a spiritual resurrection. He is claiming that the hidden, inner truth pattern of the faith is now being revealed, and the outer shell of religious laws are here, which was necessary to protect the community in a time of persecution, is no longer needed. For the true believers, the paradise that was promised in the afterlife is now to be experienced spiritually, here and now, declaring the end of the world as it is known and the beginning of a new spiritual age. And in this new age, he, the Grand Master, is not just the representative of the hidden Imam. He is the Imam himself, the living proof, the manifestation of the divine will on earth. A collective gasp goes through the crowd. This is a theological earthquake. It shatters 1,000 years of Islamic tradition. For the older generation, men who have lived and fought for the law, this is a shocking, almost blasphemous development. For the younger generation, it is a moment of ecstatic liberation. They are no longer just soldiers in a political struggle. They are the chosen people, living in the end times, witnesses to a new revelation. The reaction is polarized. Some of the older days and military commanders are horrified, seeing it as a dangerous heresy that will isolate the Nizaris from the rest of the Muslim world completely. But many, especially the young fighters, are electrified. It provides a powerful new theological justification for their actions and their sacrifice. The historical debate around the Qiyamah is intense. What was Hassan-i trying to achieve? Was he a genuine mystic who truly believed he was ushering in a new spiritual age? Or was he a clever political operator using theology to consolidate his own power, elevating his status from a mere leader to a near-divine figure, thus demanding even greater loyalty from his followers? Or was he perhaps mad? Scholars point out that this declaration did not come from nowhere. Millenarian and messianic expectations were common in the turbulent world of the 12th century. The idea of a coming Mahdi or a spiritual apocalypse was a powerful force. Hassan-i may have been tapping into this deep cultural current. A particularly strange and obscure detail of the Qiyamah ceremony was the ritual itself. For banners of different colors, white, red, yellow, and green, were erected at the corners of the platform. These were said to symbolize the different levels of the Ismaili hierarchy and, on a more esoteric level, the different spiritual realms. Hassan-i delivered his sermon, declared the end of the law, and then he and his followers shared a ceremonial feast and drank wine in the middle of the day. During the holy month of Ramadan, it was a deliberate, public, and shocking violation of the most sacred rules of Islam, a dramatic performance to signify that the old rules no longer applied. As a veteran fighter, you are caught in the middle. Your training has been in pragmatism, in the cold, hard logic of strategy. This new turn towards ecstatic mysticism is unsettling. You have always fought for your community's survival in this world. Now, you are being told that this world is just a shadow and the true reality is a spiritual one. Does this change your mission? How do you operate in a world whose laws you no longer recognize? The Qiyamah creates a deep ideological rift within the community, a tension between the old guard pragmatists and the new wave of spiritualists. The resurrection had profound consequences. It further isolated the Nizaris. If they were considered heretics before, now they were seen by many Sunnis as outright apostates. Yet, it also gave them a renewed sense of purpose and a powerful internal cohesion. They were no longer just a sect. They were the people of the resurrection. You watch as the younger fighters embrace the new doctrine with a fervor that is almost frightening. Their willingness to die is now amplified by the belief that they are already living in a form of paradise. For you, the world has become a stranger, more complicated place. The clear lines of us versus them have been blurred by a new mystical haze. The very foundation of your world has been shaken, not by an enemy army, but by your own leader. The era of the Qiyamah continues for several decades. The Nizari community turns inward, consumed by its new, radical theology. The Grand Masters who follow Hassan-i continue his mystical teachings, and Alamut becomes less a military headquarters and more a spiritual center, a place of esoteric ritual and Gnostic contemplation. The targeted assassinations continue, but they seem to be driven by a different energy now, less by cold political calculation and more by an almost otherworldly sense of judgment. You are an old man now, truly old. Your hands are gnarled, your steps slow. You have outlived your and nearly all the comrades of your youth. Your role now is purely as an advisor, a living piece of history. You spend your days in the library, the quiet scent of old parchment a constant comfort. You watch the generations turn over, and you feel a growing sense of unease. The world outside the fortress walls is changing in a way that no one, not even the mystics, could have foreseen. It begins as a faint whisper, a rumor carried by the same merchants and travelers who have always been the nerves of your intelligence system. The whispers come from the distant east, from beyond the lands of the Khwarezmi and Shoes who now rule Persia. They speak of a new power. A horde, a storm gathering on the steppes of Central Asia. They speak of a leader named Genghis Khan. At first the reports are dismissed as exaggerations. Stories of nomadic horsemen are as old as the mountains. But the whispers grow louder, more insistent, and more terrifying. They are not just raiding, they are conquering. Entire cities are being wiped from the face of the earth. Armies that were thought to be invincible are being annihilated. They move with a speed and a brutality that is almost inhuman. You sit with the young Grand Master and his advisors as they try to analyze the reports. The maps are unrolled, but the information is patchy, contradictory. This new enemy doesn't follow any of the known rules of warfare. They are a force of nature, a human hurricane. The Khwarezmian Empire, which had been the Nizar, is the first to face the storm directly. The Shah, arrogant and foolish, provokes the Great Khan. The response is swift and apocalyptic. The great cities of the Khwarezmi and Samarkand, Bukhara, Merv are not just conquered, they are systematically destroyed. Their populations are massacred on a scale that is difficult for the mind to comprehend. The news that reaches Alamut is so horrific it sounds like a fantasy. Rivers running red with blood, pyramids of skulls built outside the raised city walls. A level of methodical, industrialized slaughter that the world has never seen. This is a new kind of fear. The fear of the Seljuks was the fear of a political rival. The fear of Saladin was the fear of a brilliant military commander. This is the fear of an apocalypse. The Nizari leadership is divided on how to respond. Some, clinging to the mystical doctrines of the Qiyamah, believe their spiritual status makes them immune. They are the people of the resurrection. What power can a worldly army have over them? Others, the pragmatists who still remember the old ways, are terrified. They understand that a fortress, no matter how strong, cannot stand against an enemy that can erase entire civilizations. A fascinating and historically debated diplomatic mission takes place during this period. The Nizari Grand Master, sensing the existential threat, is said to have sent envoys not to the Mongols, but to the courts of Christian Europe. They allegedly journeyed to France and England, warning the Christian kings of the coming storm and proposing a grand, unprecedented alliance between the assassins and the Crusaders to face the common enemy. Can you imagine the scene? A Nizari fighter, a man whose predecessors had terrorized the Crusader states, now standing in the court of a European king, desperately trying to explain the scale of the Mongol threat. The European kings, embroiled in their own petty conflicts, reportedly listened with polite disbelief and did nothing. The idea of allying with the infamous assassins against a mysterious enemy from the far side of the world was simply too strange, too unbelievable. If it truly happened, was a failure. The Mongol storm continues to roll west. They are not just a horde, they are a highly organized, disciplined, and technologically advanced army. They have engineers from China who can build sophisticated siege weapons. They have a command structure that is ruthlessly efficient. And they have a simple, brutal policy. submit unconditionally, or be utterly annihilated. The whispers become a rule. The Mongol armies, now under the command of Genghis Khan's grandson Hulagu, are sweeping into Persia. Their stated goal is to destroy any power that does not bow to them. And two powers are at the top of their list: the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad and the Nizari Ismailis state in Alamut. For the first time in 150 years, the people of Alamut feel a genuine, existential dread. The Seljuks had wanted to conquer them. The Mongols, they sense, want to erase them. You stand on the highest tower, the same one where Jawad taught you about the intelligence network so long ago. You look east, into the hazy distance. You cannot see them yet, but you can feel them. A tremor in the very rock beneath your feet. A shadow falling over the world. The whispers have become a reality. The Mongols are coming. And you know with the cold certainty of a man who has seen too much history that the story of Alamut is approaching its final, terrible chapter. The arrival of the Mongol army is not a sudden attack, but a slow, suffocating tide. For months you watch from the walls of Alamut as Hulagu Khan's forces systematically reduced the smaller Nizari castles in the region. Each victory for the Mongols is a puff of smoke on a distant horizon, a grim message sent from a sister fortress in its dying moments. The stories that trickle back with the few desperate refugees are unlike any you have ever heard. They speak of Mongol siegecraft that seems like black magic. They have Mongol knells, massive trabeculites capable of hurling enormous boulders that can shatter stone walls. But they also have something new, something terrifyingly effective against mountain fortresses. Chinese siege engineers who employ gunpowder. Not for cannons, not yet, but for creating powerful explosive charges to undermine fortifications. The Mongols do not play by the old rules of siege warfare. They do not simply surround a castle and wait for it to starve. They bring overwhelming, relentless force to bear. They strip the surrounding countryside bare, not just for supplies, but as a form of psychological warfare, destroying the very land that sustains their enemies. Finally, the tide reaches the shores of Alamut itself. One morning you look out from the battlements and the valley below is no longer empty. It is a sea of canvas yurts, a forest of colorful banners, and a dark, moving mass of men and horses. The Mongol army has arrived. It stretches as far as the eye can see, a living embodiment of conquest. The silence of the mountains is replaced by the constant, low rumble of a vast military camp. The current Grand Master is a young man named Aryokai Enaldin K. Hershaw. He is not a warrior like Buz or Jayamid or a mystic like Hassan-i. He is a diplomat, a scholar, a man who prefers negotiation to conflict. He is, you realize with a sinking heart, perhaps the worst possible leader for this specific crisis. Hulagu Khan does not immediately attack. He is a patient predator. The message is simple and unwavering. Surrender unconditionally, and you will be spared. Resist, and every man, woman, and child will be put to the sword, and the fortress will be leveled so that not one stone remains upon another. The leadership of Alamut is paralyzed by indecision. The military commanders, the old-school fighter argue for resistance. They point to the impregnable walls, the vast stores of food and water. Alamut has withstood sieges for a century and a half. It can withstand this one. They believe in the legend of their own invincibility. The scholars and diplomats, led by K. Hershaw, argue for negotiation. They see the sheer overwhelming power of the Mongol army. They have heard the reports from the other castles. They know resistance is suicide. They believe they can reason with Hulagu, perhaps pay a tribute, become a vassal state, and preserve their people. You, the old veteran, see the futility of both positions. You know the fortress's defenses were designed to fight Seljuk armies, not this new kind of total war machine. But you also know the Mongol reputation. Their promises of mercy are notoriously unreliable. The siege begins in earnest. The Mongol knells start their dreadful work. Day and night the sky is filled with arcing stones. The impacts shake the very mountain. The familiar, comforting solidity of Alamut begins to feel fragile. For the first time you hear the sound of fear in the fortress, not the controlled, strategic fear you once wielded, but the raw, primal terror of people who feel their world is ending. A little-known aspect of Mongol siege tactics was their use of human shields. They would often force captured prisoners from previously conquered towns to the front lines, making them fill moats or carry ladders. This had a brutal psychological effect. To defend yourself, you had to kill other innocent people. It was a strategy designed to break an opponent's morale. Days turn into weeks. The walls are damaged, but they hold. The spirit of the defenders, though strained, does not break. The military commanders feel a flicker of hope. Perhaps the legend is true. Perhaps Alamut really is unbreakable. But Hulagu has another weapon. A brilliant understanding of psychology. He continues to send messages to Kershaw, playing on his desire for a peaceful solution. He offers terms, hints at compromises, dangles the possibility of survival. He is not just besieging the walls. He is besieging the mind of the Grand Master. The debate inside Alamut rages. The hawks scream for defiance. The doves plead for surrender. The fortress is divided against itself. The true siege is not outside the walls, but inside the council chamber. You watch Kershaw, the young leader, being worn down. He is trapped between his hardline commanders who demand a fight to the death and the terrifying, relentless pressure from the Mongol leader. He is a man caught in the gears of history, and he is being crushed. The final blow is not a military one. Hulagu, in a stroke of genius, invites Kershaw to leave the fortress and come to his camp to finalize the terms of a peaceful surrender. It is a test. By leaving the security of his walls, Kershaw would be signaling his submission. Against the furious advice of his military chiefs, Kershaw agrees. He believes he is saving his people. He walks out of the gate of the supposedly unconquerable fortress of Alamut, leaving his people and his destiny in the hands of his enemy. The moment he is in the Mongol camp, the siege is effectively over. The unbreakable fortress has been broken, not by a trebuchet, but by a lie. The surrender of Aryokai and Aldin Kershaw is a moment of profound, soul-crushing anticlimax. There is no final glorious battle. There is no heroic last stand on the walls. There is only the quiet, bewildered submission of a people whose leader has walked away. Under the watchful eyes of Mongol officers, the gates of Alamut are thrown open. The great fortress, which has defied armies for over 160 years, is surrendered without a fight. You stand among your people as the Mongol soldiers march in. They are not the disorganized barbarians of rumor. They are disciplined, silent, and efficient. Their faces are hard, their eyes impassive. They move with the confidence of a people who have never known defeat. Kershaw, now a guest in Hulagu's camp, is treated with a chillingly superficial courtesy. Hulagu knows the young Grand Master is more valuable alive than dead for now. He needs him to order the surrender of the other 40-odd Nizari fortresses still holding out in Persia. Kershaw, clinging to the hope that his cooperation will save his people, complies. He sends out messengers bearing his seal, commanding his castellans to lay down their arms. This decision is the subject of intense and bitter debate among historians to this day. Was Kershaw a naive traitor who doomed his people through his weakness and gullibility? Or was he a pragmatist making an impossible choice, sacrificing his fortresses to save the Nizari population, believing the Mongols would honor their promise of clemency? The commanders of the other castles are faced with a terrible dilemma. Do they obey the order of their Grand Master, or do they defy him and fight to the death? Most, seeing the futility of resistance and trusting in their leader's command, surrender. A few, however, refuse. The commander of the fortress of Gerd Kuh, in particular, becomes a legend. He defies the order and holds out against the Mongols for 17 more years, a lonely island of resistance in a sea of Mongol conquest. His story serves as a bitter what-if for the Nizari cause. Back at Alamut, the dismantling begins. Kershaw, still under the illusion that he is a negotiating partner, is invited by Hulagu to point out the fortress's treasures. He shows them the storehouses, the armories, and most fatefully, the library. While Kershaw is being used as a pawn, the Mongol soldiers are methodically disarming the population. They move through the fortress with a quiet efficiency that is more terrifying than any battle cry. They are not in chaos. They are implementing a plan. The final act of Kehirsh's tragedy is perhaps the most pathetic. After he has served his purpose and all the Nizari castles have been surrendered, Hulagu suggests that Kehirshah might want to travel to the court of the great Khan, Mongke, in the Mongol capital of Kukakyu. It would be a great honor, a chance to pay homage and solidify his position as a loyal vassal. Kehirshah, still desperately clinging to any scrap of hope, agrees. He undertakes the immense journey, thousands of miles across Central Asia, only to arrive at the Mongol court and be denied an audience. The great Khan refuses to see him. The message is clear: he is no longer of any use. On the long, lonely journey back, somewhere in the mountains of what is now Afghanistan, Kehirshah and his small retinue are escorted off the main path by their Mongol guards and unceremoniously executed. He dies not as a king or a martyr, but as a discarded tool. His surrender is a cautionary tale that echoes through history. It is a story about the dangers of projecting your own values onto your enemy. Kehirshah thought he was in a negotiation, a game of diplomacy with rules and honor. Hulagu knew he was in a war of annihilation, and promises were just another weapon to achieve his goals. A strange and obscure detail that survives from this period comes from the pen of a Persian historian named Dr. Malik Juvani. Juvani was in the service of Hulagu and was present at the fall of Alamut. He was a scholar, and he was fascinated by the Nizaris. He received permission from Hulagu to inspect the famous library of Alamut before it was destroyed. He writes about the incredible collection of books and scientific instruments he saw there. He was allowed to save a few of the books, mostly scientific texts and copies of the Quran, but was ordered to burn all the heretical Ismaili theological and philosophical works. This act of curated destruction is heartbreaking. Juvani, the historian, is simultaneously the chronicler of the Nizaris and a participant in the destruction of their history. He is the reason we know anything about the library, and also a reason we know so little. You watch all of this unfold with the dull ache of a man watching his world die. You see the hope drain from your people's faces, replaced by a dawning, horrifying understanding. The surrender was not their salvation. It was merely a more efficient way to be destroyed. The end, when it comes, is not a storm of fire and fury. It is a quiet, methodical, and soul-crushing act of cultural erasure. Once Kehirshah has been sent on his fatal journey and the last of the Nizari castles has been subdued, Hulagu gives the order. The systematic destruction of Alamut begins. You are forced to stand with the rest of the fortress's inhabitants, huddled in the valley below, watching as Mongol demolition crews swarm over your home. They are unmaking it. They use fire, battering rams, and the immense power of their Mongol mills to pull down the walls that have stood for nearly 2 centuries. They pray stones from the battlements and send them tumbling into the canyons below. They want to wipe Alamut from the map, to make the mountain as bare as it was before Hassan-i Sabbah first climbed it. But the destruction of the stone and mortar is not the part that breaks your heart. The true agony comes when they turn their attention to the library. You watch as soldiers who neither know nor care about the treasures they hold carry armfuls of scrolls and codices out into the main courtyard. This is the place where you first learned philosophy, where you studied the maps of the world, where the collective knowledge and wisdom of your people were gathered. It is the heart and soul of the Nizari Ismaili state. The historian Juvani, with his Mongol permit, is there. He moves through the piles of books, a scavenger picking through the bones of a dead civilization. He pulls out a few scrolls on astronomy, a treatise on medicine, a beautifully illuminated Quran. He is saving what he can, but his choices are dictated by what his masters deem harmless. Everything else, the Ismaili theological texts, the philosophical treatises, the historical records written by the Nizaris themselves, the secret doctrines of the Grand Masters, the poetry, the debates is condemned. It is all piled high in the center of the courtyard. You see books that you personally studied, scrolls you copied as a young recruit. You see the collected intelligence reports of 100 years, the patient work of 1,000 forgotten agents. You see the entire intellectual heritage of your people, a treasure far more valuable than any gold, treated like so much firewood. A Mongol officer gives a signal. A soldier with a torch steps forward. The flame touches the dry parchment. For a moment, nothing happens. Then, a corner curls, blackens, and glows red. A wisp of smoke rises into the cold mountain air, and then the fire catches. It leaps from scroll to scroll, from book to book, with a hungry roar. The fire grows into a massive pyre, a column of flaming smoke that ascends to the heavens. The smoke smells of burning leather, paper, ink, and something else. Burning memory. You are watching your own history being turned to ash. This is the greatest of all the assassinations. Not the killing of a vizier or a sultan, but the killing of a culture. The Mongols understood a profound truth. To truly destroy a people, you must destroy their story. By burning the library of Alamut, they were ensuring that the Nizaris would be remembered only through the words of their enemies. The slander of the Hashishin, the tales of Marco Polo, the condemnations of Sunni chroniclers, these would survive. Their own explanation of who they were and what they believed was being silenced forever. This loss is incalculable. Historians for the next 1,000 years will be forced to reconstruct the story of the Nizari state from fragments, from hostile sources, from archaeological evidence. They will forever be guessing, debating, trying to read the faint outlines of a story whose core has been burnt out. The questions you have wrestled with the true nature of Hassan-i Sabbah, the reality of the gardens, the politics of Sinan, the meaning of the Qiyamah will now be almost impossible to answer definitively. The primary sources are gone. A strange, sad detail about the destruction is that the Mongols were, in their own way, pragmatists. They often spared artisans and scholars from conquered populations, relocating them to other parts of their empire where their skills could be of use. It is possible, even likely, that some of the scholars and librarians of Alamut were spared the general massacre that followed, and were forced into the service of their conquerors. One can only imagine the quiet agony of these men, forced to use their knowledge for the benefit of those who had destroyed their world, carrying the memory of the lost library with them to their graves. As the sun sets, the fire still rages, a malevolent orange glow against the deep purple of the mountains. The great library of Alamut, once the brightest beacon of knowledge in the Ismaili world, is now a funeral pyre. But what is happening in that courtyard is a deeper, more permanent kind of destruction. It is the end of a world, and you, one of its last living links to its beginning, are forced to bear witness to the flame. The fire in the courtyard eventually burns itself out, leaving behind a heap of black, brittle ash that the wind scatters across the despoiled mountain. The destruction of the fortress is complete. The Mongols have been thorough. What they cannot burn, they pull down. What they cannot pull down, they leave to the mercy of the wind and the rain. The final act is the dispersal of your people. The general massacre that many had feared does not happen, at least not at Alamut itself. The Mongols' cruelty is more methodical. They round up the remaining Nizari population, thousands of men, women, and children from Alamut and the surrounding valleys. They are divided into small groups and marched away in different directions, sent into exile across the vast Mongol Empire. It is a calculated policy of diaspora, ensuring that the Nizaris can never again gather in sufficient numbers to form a community, let alone a state. You are part of one of these sad, shuffling columns of refugees. You walk away from the mountain that has been your entire life, not even daring to look back. The eagle's nest is an empty, broken shell. The great experiment is over. Your journey is long and hard. You travel through lands that have also been ravaged by the Mongol tide. You see the ruins of great cities, the fields fallow and salted. You are a refugee in a world of refugees. During this long, slow march into obscurity, you begin to witness the final, ironic transformation of your people. The reality of the Nizari state is dead, but the myth is just beginning its new life. In the taverns and caravanserais along the road you hear the stories. The merchants and travelers who do not know who you are speak of the fall of the assassins. But their stories are not about a political state destroyed by a superior military force. They are wild, fantastical tales. They say the assassins were demon worshippers, and that the Mongols were a divine scourge sent to cleanse the earth of their evil. They say the old man of the mountain had a magical garden where he brainwashed his followers with drugs and women, and that the fall of Alamut was a great victory for morality. They whisper that the assassins were not truly destroyed, that they merely melted into the shadows, and that they still wander the earth ready to kill for a price. The complex political and religious movement you gave your life to is being flattened into a caricature. The scholar, the engineer, the farmer, the philosopher, all of these identities are erased. Only one remains. The assassin. The mysterious, superhuman killer. This is the final posthumous victory of your enemies. They, along with the Mongols, have succeeded in destroying your truth. All that is left is their version of you. And their version, you realize, is a much better story. It's more exciting, more romantic, more terrifying. It's a legend that will have far longer legs than the complicated, messy truth. Historians will debate the fate of the Nizari survivors. For centuries it was believed they were almost completely wiped out. But modern scholarship, drawing on scattered sources and the oral traditions of the surviving Ismaili community, shows a different picture. They did not vanish, they went underground. They survived the way they always had, by becoming invisible. They dispersed, blending into the larger Muslim populations of Persia, Syria, India and Central Asia. They practiced Taqiyya, the religious dissimulation of their true beliefs, on a massive scale. They became Sufis. They became 12-hour Shias. They became 12-hour Shias. They became Sunni merchants. They hid their faith in their hearts and waited for the storm to pass. The Grand Master's line did not die with Khair Shah. His young son was secretly saved and smuggled to safety, and the lineage of the Im Aus continued in hiding, passed down from father to son in obscurity for centuries. The Nizari community, though shattered and scattered, survived. One of the most obscure and fascinating theories about the Nizari legacy is their possible influence on other secret societies. Some fringe historical theories have tried to link the assassins to the Knights Templar, suggesting the Templars learned their methods of clandestine organization and finance from their strange neighbors in the Holy Land. There is no real evidence for this, but it speaks to the power of the Nizari legend. They became the blueprint for the very idea of a secret society that manipulates world events from the shadows. You eventually find a quiet place to live out your final years, a small, forgotten village in a distant mountain valley. You are just another old man with a quiet past. No one knows you once stood beside the great Hassan-i Sabbah, that you trained with the legendary Jawad, that you witnessed the burning of the greatest library of your age. Your memories are your only remaining treasure. You are a library of one, and as you sit in the sun, you sometimes tell stories to the village children. You don't tell them the truth, of course. That would be too dangerous. Instead, you tell them a version of the legend. You tell them a version of the legend. You tell them a fairy tale, because you have learned the final, most bitter lesson of all. Sometimes the only way for a truth to survive is for it to disguise itself as a story. The reality of Alamut is gone, but the myth of the assassins you suspect will live forever. And so the fortress crumbles to dust, and the whispers fade into the wind. The story is over. You can feel the echo of it now, a soft, distant vibration. The clatter of the looms in the dusty town, the cold, sharp air on the high mountain path, the scent of old paper in the immense, silent library. These are just memories now, dream images drifting past. They ask for nothing. You don't need to hold on to them. You can just let them float by, like clouds across a quiet, moonlit sky. Feel the weight of your own body, a gentle, pleasant heaviness, sinking ever so slightly deeper into the support beneath you. The journey to Alamut is done. There are no more tests to pass, no more lessons to learn. There's deep and comfortable quiet. Your own breathing is a soft, steady rhythm, a gentle tide washing in undoubt, carrying away the last remnants of the tale. The names, the places, the struggles, they can all dissolve now, leaving behind only a sense of peace. You are safe in your own fortress of rest now, far from the reach of any history, any story. There is only the darkness, the comfort, and the gentle, approaching softness of sleep. The final page is turned. If your eyelids are still not heavy, another story might be the final lullaby you need. Sleep sweetly. Good night.